So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Multiple Girls Rwby. So let's start the series. Sapphire blue eyes looked over the city of Vale through the window of a dust airship that was flying over the city. Currently it was carrying passengers at the age of 17 that were all students that was going to Beacon Academy for training to become huntsmen. Among them was a girl that was wearing a black hooded vest over a dark orange low-cut t-shirt along with long-sleeved black fingerless gloves, black short shorts, dark orange thigh-high stockings and black combat boots. Finally strapped onto each side of her thighs were silver-color rectangled objects as the girl's weapons that were currently folded. The girl had her hood over her head that shadow cover over half her face to hide away from being recognized. The reason why was because of two individuals that were currently talking to each other. Both were girls that are sisters even though they didn't look related. One was a short-haired redhead that looked younger than ever, one on the airship wearing a red cape. The other was a golden blonde whose hair was massive, long and untangled mess, as she seemed to be excited that her younger sister was going to Beacon with her. Seeing this caused the hooded girl to smile at the two as she thought back to her conversation with the headmaster yesterday. Flashback, yesterday 11 p.m. Thank you for coming Professor Ojban. I apologize on this short notice at a late night though, the same hooded girl said as she sat across the table with the headmaster of Beacon Academy. Ojban would just take a sip of his coffee from his favorite mug before he would answer her. No need for apologies, it has been quite a night. I'm sure you heard what had just occurred, he said as Ojban would slide a device where the girl would take into her hands as she watched as a footage play on the screen that made her smile. Rwby, she's already shown potential of being a huntress, she said out loud as this caused Ojban to raise an curious eyebrow at her. I take it that you know of Ms. Rose then? He asked, which the hooded girl would nodded to his answer before returning the device to him. Well, through her sister, yes. Yang and I go way back at Signal before I had to leave on my final year for a family matters that I had to take care of, she explained, to which Ojban would nod in understanding as he took another sip from his mug. And I take it that this meeting is about you wanting to join my school this year? Ojban asked as the hooded girl gave a nod once again. Well then, given that you were one of Signal's brightest students before you left and who your parents were, I will grant you that. But in return I expect you to attend every class through the whole day, not skipping out just to make up lost time with your girlfriend, he finished with an amusing smile on his lips as he saw the girl would tense up and scratch her finger against her cheek nervously before responding. Of course Professor, and thank you again, she said, and as she was about to speak up, Ojban would speak up once again. Before you go and get a night's rest to leave with the other students in the morning, I have one last question for you, Ms. Namikaze. He paused a moment to take another sip from his mug before continuing. Why have the hood on? He asked as he saw the teen girl would raise a hand up to her head and feel the hood was still over her head. Oh haha, sorry, didn't want to be recognized yet to spoil the surprise, she said as the girl would remove her hood off to reveal she had shoulder-length blonde hair along with twin red fox ears on top her head. Plus not everyone is too fond of faunus, especially no thanks to the white-fanged Naru, explained to Ojban. Flashback end. Ak Yang, gross, you got puke on your feet. Naru was snapped out of her thoughts when she heard Rwby's voice, then turned to see Yang had vomit on the toe area of her booted shoe. Only it was just a small one that can be easily be cleaned up by wiping it, yet Yang would still freak out when she tried to shake it off while muttering gross over and over, and Rwby having to run away from her sister, leaving everyone to laugh in amusement. Naru included, though hers was sort of a short one to avoid drawing attention to herself. Not that she was hiding or anything, but she wanted to surprise the sisters herself. Although doing it now within a dust airship may not be wise given that Yang would possibly be angry with Naru first. And the fox faunus knew that a angry Yang plus being high up in the air would not be very good results. Turning back Tati window, she was standing in front of Naru, could see Beacon Academy coming into view and the announcement that they would be landing soon. Having a quick check that her weapons were still strapped on tight to her thighs and her hood remain up over her head, Naru went over to the side door where she knew would be the exit once the airship landed. Although standing across from her she saw a blonde-hair boy was holding his mouth tightly with his hand and looked ill, giving Naru the hint that he must have been the cause of the vomit. As she turned away and looked around the crowd of students, besides the sisters there didn't seem to be anyone interesting that was among the crowd so far until the airship had landed and the doors opened, as the blonde boy was the first to ran out and empty out his stomach in a nearby trash can as Naru walked out among the crowd of people to blend in and slip out of the sisters' sight before they notice. with Rwby and Yang. Gazing at the front entrance of Beacon, both sisters were staring out in awe as the place looked amazing. This was the place where all students from Vale as well as the other kingdoms of Remnant had come to learn and train into becoming huntsmen that would defend against the creatures of Grimm or beyond. Yet still, despite her excitement of being here, Yang couldn't help but let a sad frown form on her lips as she thought of one person that wasn't here to share this moment. However, before the blonde brawler could shift off to daydreaming, the sudden gasp from her sister brought Yang back as she saw Rwby having a panic attack of excitement of seeing newly weapons being carried by passing students. Yang couldn't help but laugh a little from Rwby's passionate love for weapons, which she would grab the young redhead's cape and pull her back to prevent her from wandering off. "Easy there, little sister, you know they're just weapons," Yang said, which Rwby would only turn and gave her older sister an angry pout which made her look cute. "Just weapons? They're an extension of ourselves, they are a part of us. Plus they're so cool," Rwby said in her excitement like a kid in a candy store as Yang continued speaking. "Well, if that's the case, why can't you swoon over your own weapon? Aren't you happy with it?" she asked, and that's when Yang watched her baby sister would take out her scythe sniper weapon Crescent Rose and hugged it happily. "Of course I'm happy with Crescent Rose, she's my baby. I just really like seeing new ones, it's like meeting new people." But better, the red-headed girl spoke as her golden blonde-haired sister would reach over and yank the hood of Rwby's red cape over her head in a teasing manner which made the young girl pout more. "Rwby, come on, why don't you go try and make some friends of your own?" Yang asked as she looked to the side, but the moment she looked she thought she saw a familiar hooded girl among the crowds, and when she blinked the girl was gone while Rwby would pull the hood of her cape off from her head. "But why would I need friends when I have you?" Rwby asked while Yang would bite her lower lips as she thought for a moment until she saw a group of new students come by and an idea came to her. "Well, actually my friends are here now, taga catch up by," Yang said quickly as she rushed past her sister. That caused Rwby to spin uncontrollably while Yang would feel guilty of abandoning her sister but couldn't take the chance of losing sight of the hooded girl she just saw, wanting to know if it was who she thought it was, and would make a mental note to make up to Rwby later. "Wait, where are you going? Are we supposed to go to our dorms? Where are our dorms? Do we have dorms?" "Oh, I don't know what I'm doing," Rwby said during mid-spin until she slowed down and had a dizzy look in her eyes before falling back into a cart filled with luggages. With Naru. Naru had winced when she saw Rwby crashed into the cart, and a girl in white was soon yelling at her. The hooded fauness had to hide quickly when Yang had spotted her once, being as she didn't want to spoil her surprise just yet, but frowned when she saw the older sibling abandoned her sister to go look for Naru, which the fox fauness believed it was her fault of being spotted. Back to Rwby and the girl in white she saw continue to be scolding the younger girl while shaking a vial of red dust right in front of Rwby's face, and Naru's sapphire eyes widened in realizing what was about to happen. Just as Rwby was about to sneeze into the red dust, a quick blur blinded her vision and a hand covering her mouth that she sneezed into, preventing the young girl from doing so into the red dust as the hand left her mouth. "Rwby, you should know to always cover your mouth when you sneeze." Rwby looked up to see the hooded girl standing in front of her, wiping her hand that Rwby sneezed into against her back, but the younger girl's silver eyes were staring wide at the girl's sapphire blue ones as she got a good look at her face. "Nah, Naru?" the younger girl asked while Naru would only smile and was about to speak until a flash of red tackled her to the ground as Rwby hugged her tightly. "Naru, I can't believe it's really you." The redhead screamed in excitement, which Naru tensed in pain when Rwby screamed into her faunus ears under her hood, but she just smiled and hugged the younger girl back. "Haha, you haven't changed a bit, Rubes," Naru said to Rwby, and was about to get up till both girls heard a rather loud fake cough that ruined their heartwarming reunion. "Excuse me, but there are other people present, you know." Naru looked up to see that the white-haired girl was still there as she and Rwby got back up to their feet. Rwby, remembering what happened before Naru arrived, would start poking her fingers together nervously. "I'm really sorry about the luggage and almost sneezing into the dust," she said. However, her apology did not go well with the white-haired girl. "Ugh, you complete dolt, what are you even doing here anyways? Aren't you a little young to be attending here at Beacon?" she asked while Rwby would lower her head down to avoid the icy blue eyes glaring at her while Naru would glare her own blue eyes. Not going to allow the girl to continue scolding her young friend, the fox faunus would step up to block the white girl's view on Rwby. Hey, she said she was sorry, princess, so why don't you just lay off? Naru yelled out, slightly causing the white girl to step back at the tone of voice, and before she could say anything a new voice spoke up. It's Eris. Actually, all three girls turned to see a black-haired girl with amber eyes and a black bow on top her head. Naru raised an eyebrow when she noticed that the bow seemed to move a little before the girl continued, Weiss Schnee, heiress to the Schnee Dust Company, one of the largest producers of energy propellant in the world. The black-haired girl explained as the now-known Weiss let a satisfied smile form on her face. Finally, some recognition, Weiss said, that caused Naru's eyes to roll before the new girl would continued. This same company, infamous for its controversial labor forces and questionable business partners, she added as Naru let out a amused smile, and Rwby giggled in amusement as well, while Weiss herself was not. What? How dare the nerve of ugh. She would turn around and started walking off, feeling embarrassed, while servants in suits would pick up the dropped luggage and place them back on the cart. Rwby, feeling a little bad for Weiss, would speak up once again towards a retreating Weiss. I promise I'll make this up to you, she shouted, while Naru would let out a sigh at the young girl's attempt. Oh, Rwby, still the kind-hearted girl you are, she mumbled to herself until her fox ears pick up footsteps walking away. As Naru turned to see, the black-haired girl was already walking away from the pair. Hearing a sad sigh and a thud sound, Naru turned to see that Rwby had fallen onto the ground and laid there. Welcome to Beacon, Rwby said to herself as Naru frowned sadly to her and was about to help her up until the faunus stopped when she noticed another person approaching them. Rwby had her eyes closed when she noticed a shadow was blocking out the sun, as the redhead thought it was Naru at first. But when she opened her silver eyes, she was surprised to see a blonde boy had stuck his hand out to her. Hi, I'm John, the blonde-headed boy introduced himself as Naru gave a friendly smile at him, while Rwby had shyly smiled back before taking his hand into her own to be helped up to her feet. Rwby, say, aren't you the guy who threw up on the ship? She asked as Naru now took a closer look, then snickered in a laugh, while John just hung his head down and groaned. 5 minutes later. All I'm saying is that motion sickness is a much more common problem. Naru had heard John spoke while she walked along on Rwby's right, while John took left as the trio were walking on the pathway to Beacon. As the faunus blonde listened to their conversation as John explained to his motion sickness problem. Look, I'm sorry, but Vomit Boy was the first thing that came to mind, Rwby explained to the blonde boy, while Naru would add her voice to the conversation. Well, you would have been called Crater Face if I hadn't stopped you from sneezing at the last second, Rwby. So it's not the worst name I've heard so far, she said as Ruby's face went red in embarrassment and pouted to the older girl, but did not say anything, while John would continued. Well, the name's Jaune Arc. Short, sweet, rolls off the tongue, ladies love it, he said, and at that statement caused both girls to stop and stare at each other with raised eyebrows before turning back to their male companion. Do they? Both said at once as John would get nervous and raise both of his hands up in defense to his manhood. They will. Well, I hope they will. I mean, my mom always says, never mind, he said as Naru spoke up to him. My advice to you, John, just be yourself and you'll do fine of finding the right girl, she told him as Rwby would soon turn her attention to the fox faunus now. Speaking which, Naru, when did you get back? How come you didn't visit me or Young? The younger girl asked while Naru would place her hands behind her hooded head. Yesterday, I wanted to surprise you and Young, but seeing as your sister ditched you earlier, it's her loss of not seeing me sooner, Naru explained as John looked at the two girls. So you all know each other? He asked as Rwby turned and smiled at him. Yep, she's my sister's faunus girlfriend, she said, and this caused John to stumble in his step at hearing the info. Wait, Naru is a faunus and your sister's girlfriend? He asked in surprise as Naru looked at him with narrow eyes before pulling her hood back to show off her fox ears among her blonde hair. Yeah, I'm a faunus, and yes, I'm dating Ruby's sister Young. Is that a problem? She asked as the blonde boy would quickly wave his hands in the air while shaking his head fast. No. No problem at all, just caught off guard is all, he said as Naru gave him a look for a moment till she nodded her head and raised her hood back over her head. You're all right in my book, John, Naru told him as the trio would continue to walk off in silence. Once things became a bit awkward, Rwby would spoke up. So I got this, she said as she pulled out Crescent Rose, which surprised John as he leaped back and pointed out towards the deadly weapon. Whoa, is that a scythe? he asked, which the red-headed girl nodded happily to him before giving a few swings to give him a small demonstration. It's also a customizable, high-impact sniper rifle, Rwby explained as she pulled the handle that made a clicking noise. Seeing John's confused face, Naru spoke up. It's also a gun, she said as John finally understood now before Rwby turned to him in wonder. So what do you got? She asked in excitement while John would act a little nervous before pulling out a sword and the sheath would turn into a shield next as Rwby would eyed up on the objects with interest. Well, I got a sword that was passed down by my great-great-grandfather during the war, and the shield can turn into a sheath so that I can use to carry the sword, the blonde-hair boy explained to the girls. It sounds like a family heirloom, but still it's a pretty good sword, John. Not many people would stick to the classics these days, Naru explained as Rwby nodded in agreement. That made John smiled in appreciation from the girls before Rwby turned to Naru as she eagerly waited to see hers. However, Naru only gave her a smile before speaking. I would love to show you, Rwby, but we won't have time. Come on, Naru said as she turned to walk off towards Beacon, which Rwby and John would quickly followed her. Right before they reached the entrance for the orientation, Naru stopped and turned to the two. Right before we enter in, Rwby, why don't you go first? We'll see you later, John, Naru said as Rwby agreed and lead the way while Naru followed. John though was dumbstruck at the sudden of being ditched. Ah great, where am I supposed to find nice, quirky girls to talk to now? He said as entered without noticing that a red-headed Amazon girl that was staring when he passed by. With Yang. Yang had stood among the crowd with a small pout on her face. Ever since she left Rwby, the blonde brawler had no luck of finding the person she was looking for until she gave up thinking she was imagining things. And now she was feeling guilty of leaving her baby sister behind, who was possibly upset with Yang right now. The least the blonde did was save a spot for her sister whenever Rwby would arrive and hope it was a start for the young redhead to forgive her just a little. Taking a look back at the entrance, Yang's lilac-colored eyes soon saw a girl in red as she knew it was her sister as she started calling out while waving her hand. Rwby, over here. I saved you a spot. Yang called out over the crowd's voice. She must have gotten her sister's attention before she soon saw Rwby making her way over to where she was, but Yang soon noticed that someone else was following her behind but couldn't see before of the crowd. Once she saw that Rwby was in range, Yang would speak up once more. So how's your first day going, little sis? The blonde soon would lose her voice when she noticed the person behind Rwby came close enough to see. As lilac eyes would stare into sapphire-colored eyes as the hooded girl she saw earlier couldn't help but give her a warm smile to the blonde girl. What? No puns this time, Yang? I'm quite shocked right now, Naru said to the blonde brawler before she suddenly became nervous when she saw the lilac-colored eyes suddenly turned red. Naru had known Yang ever since they first started at Signal Academy and have only met a couple of weeks later when the blonde brawler offered to become the Fox Fauna's friend. Naru enjoyed her time hanging out with Yang as they went through their first year as best friends, in which Naru would soon meet Rwby during the time, and the young redhead had found Naru's fox's ears very cute. Then would soon started dating in the middle of their second year at Signal. During the events of spending much time with Yang, the Faunus learned many things from her girlfriend, a energetic and bright young girl that likes to have fun along being straightforward and confident, and most of all enjoys making puns, whether they were good or bad. While this had showed that she could be a good person, Naru knew that getting on Yang's bad side would be dangerous. When angered, this causes her semblance to be acidive as fire burst out from parts of her body, as well as changing her eye color red as a side effect. From what Naru remembered, Yang could easily get angered by two things, Rwby being picked on and someone that messing with her air. So right now the Fox Faunus was very nervous when she saw Yang's eyes change colored, and Naru would have ran for her life had it not been for Rwby. Right at the moment, the younger girl was restraining her older sister by using her red cape to wrap around Yang's body and pulling it over her shoulder in attempt to hold the brawler in place, while surprisingly, that the cape did not tear apart. Yang had only got her arm free from the restraint, but instead of freeing herself she was making grabbing swipes towards the hooded Faunus that was a feet away from her. Yang! Clam down already, you're making everyone stare. Rwby cried out as they were getting some attention from the students that were wondering what was going on. Rwby, let me go. And you? Yang yelled while she pointed a finger of her free hand at the Fox Faunus in front of her. Where the hell have you been? Why didn't you tell me that you were going to be here? The golden blonde girl half-asked and yelled out, still trying to grab the fox faunus, while Naru would only let out a nervous smile at her. Now Young, let's just take a deep breath and think happy thoughts, no reason to get Youngri, right? Naru asked as she watched Young suddenly froze still in place, causing Rwby to nearly stumble forward when her sister stopped moving. Both Naru and Rwby stared at the blonde brawler remain still for a moment until they noticed that her eye color changed back. Then Young would start snicker before she started laughing out that made both girls uneasy. From it, did you just make a pun there? Because that was terrible coming from you, Naru, Young told her as she resumed laughing, while Naru and Rwby would only laugh a little to join her at first. However, that all soon ended when Young had suddenly stopped laughing and the redness in her eyes returned, and before Naru could react the brawler grabbed the fox faunus by her vest and brought her in close. As Naru's sapphire eyes went wide when she felt soft lips pressing against her own that caused face to blush before closing her eyes. Due to Naru wearing a hood over her head and Yang's massive hair, it was hard for anyone to see if they had looked their way. However, Rwby's face grew red and had to cover her own eyes with her hand as she knew that Naru and her sister were kissing each other. After a moment or two, Young removed her lips from the faunus girls but did not back away. Instead, she moved her face towards where Naru's fox ears were hidden beneath the hood. But that doesn't mean you're off the hook yet, my little foxy, Young whispered to her. From the tone of voice and the words she used caused a shiver to run down on Naru's spine, but managed to nod at her head before Young let go of her, then turned to Rwby with her eyes back to normal once again and smiled brightly at the redhead. So as I was saying, how was your first day, little sis? The blonde asked in a cheerful tone that Rwby would remove her hand from her eyes, then blink in confusion at her sister's sudden change mood. However, upon hearing the question being asked, the young girl's face turned to anger at remembering what happened earlier. You mean since you ditched me and I nearly exploded? Rwby asked while Naru was standing back behind the sisters to clam herself down to breathe easy. Young, seeing her sister like this, had a guilty frown on her face at what she did earlier, but the part of nearly exploded got her attention. Yikes, meltdown already? She asked. However, Rwby would only shook her head no before going off to explaining. No, I literally almost exploded a hole in front of the school. See, I tripped over some crabby girl's luggage and then she yelled at me. And then I almost sneezed in front of fire dust that was in the air if Naru hadn't stopped it, but she still yelled at me. I felt really bad and I just wanted her to stop yelling at me, Rwby said to her sister, and as it turned out, Weiss just happened to come up behind the young girl to investigate what was all the yelling about earlier until she recognized Rwby instantly. You! The white-haired girl yelled enough to scare the redhead before she jumped up into the nearest person's arms, bridal style, which happens to be Naru, as the fox faunus blinked in confusion while Rwby freaked out in terror. Oh God, it's happening again! The young girl cried while burying her face into Naru's shoulder like a frightened child just as the hooded faunus turned and glared her eyes at seeing Weiss. You again? I thought I told you to lay off from her after she said she was sorry. Naru yelled at Weiss, but the heiress didn't back away from the hooded girl this time and continued to argue. She's lucky enough we weren't blown off the side of the cliff. Weiss yelled out. While this was happening, Young looked back and forth between the two groups, then looked at her sister with wide lilac eyes in shock. Oh my God, you really did almost exploded, Young said as Rwby would soon hop off from Naru's arms before turning to Weiss to apologize once again. I'm really sorry, it was an accident. What's this? Rwby asked when Weiss held out some sort of instructions manual with the title, Dust for Dummies, on top the page and a pencil drawing picture of a man holding a dust crystal in his hand and had a puzzled look on his face. The Schnee Dust Company is not responsible for, before Weiss could continue. Naru would snatch the manual out from her hand while the heiress would turn her glaring icy blue eyes attention back to the hooded faunus girl. You're only going to give her brain damage with this stuff. How about just accepting her apology and moving on instead of acting like some snot-nosed rich brat who believes she knows everything? Naru's words must have hit a nerve before Weiss's face was red as a tomato while gritting her teeth hard in anger and steam seemed to blow out from her ears. Yang was getting the feeling that tensions were running high up, and seeing a worried look on Rwby's face made think it was best to stop this before it gets any worse between the fox faunus and the heiress. Look, sounds like you all just got off on the wrong foot. Why don't you start over and try to be friends, okay? Yang asked, trying her best to be a peacekeeper, Naru only turned to her and gave a, "Are you freaking serious?" look that made the blonde brawler laugh a little nervous. Rwby however brightened up at the idea her sister came up with and quickly agreed. "Yeah, great idea sis. Hello Weiss, I'm Rwby and that's Naru. Want to hang out? We could go shopping for school supplies," Rwby said while she stuck her hand out to shake the white-haired girl's hand. Naru could only frown at then and was about to protest until Weiss would answer to the younger girl. "Yeah, and we can paint our nails. And try on clothes. And talk about cute boys like tall, blonde, and scraggly over there," the heiress explained while pointing her thumb backwards without turning to John, which the boy was standing by and raised his head up with interest when Weiss talked about him. Naru could only narrow her eyes as she could tell Weiss was being sarcastic, however Rwby didn't think of this and had a bright look on her face. "Wow, really?" the young redhead asked with hope in her silver eyes. However Weiss only had a frown on her face when she plainly said no, that caused Rwby's smiling face to turn into a sad frown. After that happened, Naru was ready to pounce onto the heiress to give a beating of her life until the taping sound of a microphone was made and Professor Ojbin was up on standing next to Glinda Goodwitch, making his speech. During the speech on stage, Naru paid half attention to what the headmaster was saying as she looked around the crowd of students that were attending. Some she had recognized from Signal while others she didn't, that must have been from other schools from the other 3 kingdoms. The only ones the faunus thought were interesting were only 4. One of them was a redhead girl that seemed to dress as a Amazon Spartan. The other 2 were a boy that wore green and had a calm look on his face, while the girl next to him seemed to be excited and couldn't keep still as she was hopping on her feet to look over the crowd's head. The last one was the black-haired girl she and Rwby met earlier with Weiss, but seemed to be standing against the wall away from the crowd of people. That was so far of who seemed interesting in Naru's point of view until she realized that Ojbin was done with his speech and that Goodwitch was telling them all that they will be gathered in the ballroom where they will sleep and everything. He seemed kind of off. Naru heard Yang speak up as the fox faunus turned back to the group she was with at the moment, noticing that everyone soon left while Rwby would speak up next after. "It's almost like he wasn't even there," the redhead said, and just before Naru would voice in her own opinion, John would lean towards the group, more particular towards Weiss. "I'm a natural blonde, you know," he said as Weiss would pinch the bridge of her nose with her fingers and shook her head while Naru would palm slap her own forehead while letting out an annoyed sigh. "Ugh, I need some fresh air," Naru stated out loud, and just as she turned to leave, a hand suddenly grabbed the back of her hood and yanked her back hard as the hood would slide off from Naru's head. "Not so fast, remember what I just said a moment ago?" Yang asked her, but Naru could respond. A sudden gasp caught their attention as she turned to see Weiss staring wide-eyed at her in shock before pointing to Naru's fox ears. "You're a faunus!" Weiss nearly screamed out as Naru gave the heiress a blank expression on her face before answering back her shouted question sarcastically. "No, I'm the cookie monster that steals all of Rwby's cookies and eats them while she sleeps at night." As she said this, Rwby lets out a loud gasp. "But I thought you said the cookie monster wasn't real?" the young redhead said with fear in her wide silver eyes while Weiss looked at the young teen then back at Naru, and the heiress just lets out a humph sound from her throat before turning away to leave the group. Yang would watch the white-haired girl leave before saying out loud, "Wow, that was Weiss cold of her to do, I get it." The blonde brawler said in an attempted pun to bright up the mood as John looked puzzled and Rwby would only shook her head at her sister's bad pun. However, the sad look remained on the younger girl's face, still feeling down of what happened a moment ago with the Schnee heiress. Naru saw this, that made her frown. To her the young redhead was like an adorable little sister the faunus ever wanted, and seeing Rwby sad like this was heartbreaking. Just then an idea hit Naru enough to make her smile as she placed her hands onto the silver objects that were strapped to her thighs. "Rwby," she spoke out to get the younger girl's attention. When Rwby turned her silver eyes in her direction, Naru pressed her thumbs on the small switches that was on the objects before grabbing them into her hands, and pulled them off the straps that hold them in place. Raising both her arms up, the objects in her hands would shift and unfold to turn into silver tunfas as Naru gripped onto the handles and held her weapons in a guard position against her arms as the faunus looked to see Rwby's reaction. She was not disappointed when Rwby's silver eyes wide and shined in awe as she moved in closer to examine both tunfas within Naru's grasp. Now watch this, the fox faunus told her as Naru back away from Rwby a little, then press her thumbs onto another switch on both tunfas before Naru twist, then slam both of them together and lock in place. Rwby watched on with wide eyes as she witnessed both weapons fuse and combine together to forge into a single firearm that was a twin-barrel magnum gun as Naru held up in display with the barrel aiming safely away from the young girl. I call it Tempest, Naru told her with a smile. It's beautiful, can I hold it? Rwby asked Naru in a shy-like manner which had made Naru smile, seeing that the redhead's mood had changed. Other than her sweet love taste for cookies, the young girl had a major love for weapons, especially for dangerous ones like Rwby's crescent rose. Sure Rwby, it's not really loaded anyways, the ammunition for it is with my things I brought with me that I'll get tomorrow before initiation starts, Naru explained before handing Tempest to Rwby, which the young redhead nearly dropped in surprise at feeling the weight of it, but she adjusted and started examining the weapon in her hands. Yang looked on with a smile on her face as she watched her sister and her girlfriend interact together as Naru would explain to Rwby how Tempest works. Touring to the side, the brawler noticed that Jaune was still standing there quiet as he watched the two girls chat a bit. So wait, aren't you vomit boy? Yang asked, and this caused Jaune to hung his head low in embarrassment once again. Time skip hours later, time 9:45 p.m. The ballroom was large enough to hold all of the students that would be taking the initiation. After dinner was served in the cafeteria, everyone was dressed in their sleeping clothes and had sleeping bags scattered around on the floors ready for a good night's rest. Naru had changed out of her clothing and was currently wearing hers, that was a black sports bra and long gray sweatpants, while letting her fox ears being exposed for everyone to see. Some that knew her from Signal had greeted her during dinner, while others, mostly non-faunus, that were new to her either avoid her or treat her lowly, like calling her names or glaring, but Naru just shrugged it off. Honestly, Naru didn't care much of how politics works, as long as she has people like Yang and Rwby in her life it was enough for her. Right now Naru was just laying down on her sleeping bag staring up at the ceiling, while two sleeping bags on her right. Rwby was laying down in her own PJs scribbling down her pencil on a sheet of paper. Yang in her own PJs as well would soon join them as she dropped down onto the middle that was empty between Naru and Rwby, as the blonde brawler would turn to her little sister. It's like a big slumber party, right? She asked her, but Rwby still remained focused on what she was writing while answering her sister. I don't think Dad would approve of all the boys though, she said, Yang looking over her shoulder to see that Naru laying down on her back and had her eyes closed as a grin-like smile speared on Yang's lips and was about to say something till Naru cut her off. Don't even think of saying it, all the shirtless boys in Remnant won't be safe from me if you try flirting with them, she said with her eyes closed, and Yang made a pout for a moment before a teasing smile formed on her lips. Is someone feeling a little jealous? I'm surprised you say something like that. What makes you think a hot girl like me would do that when she's got a foxy person like you? Yang asked the faunus, and this time Naru did look at her with one eye open while the other remained closed. Because I know you, Naru said simply, then would close her eye to resume back to get a night's rest. Feeling that was all she going to get out from her girlfriend for the night, Yang would turn back to her sister to see her writing something. What's that? She asked as Rwby would stop her writing till she could look at her older sister to answer her. A letter to the gang back at Signal. I promised to tell them all about Beacon and how things are going, the redhead explained as Yang let a bright smile on her face before speaking up. Ah, that's so cute. Yang would squealed out before Rwby threw a pillow into her face in embarrassment. Shut up. I didn't get to take my friends with me to school. It's weird not knowing anyone here, Rwby said while hugging her favorite pillow, a face of a dog with a tongue sticking out, that she hugged closely to her chest. Hey, now that's not true. There's Naru, Yang started before said faunus girl would speak up once more. I only know her since you introduced us way before we started dating, the fox girl said with her eyes remaining closed, which Yang would roll her own eyes before she resumed of what she was about to say. And what about Jaune? He's nice, there you go, plus one friend. That's 100% increase. The blonde brawler said in a cheerful tone. However, Rwby could only frown as she turned around and stared up at the ceiling. I'm pretty sure risk counts as a negative friend. Back to zero, she said, that caused her sister to frown a little before quickly changing it back to a smile. There's no such thing as negative friends. You just made one friend and one enemy. Yang said, only to be hit in the face by Ruby's favorite pillow, giving Yang the hint that it didn't help. Naru, having to listen to the sisters' conversation, would soon open her eyes, then lift herself up to the she was laying on one elbow before turning to see the young girl across from her. Rwby, look, it's only been one day, trust me and your sister, you've got friends all around you that you haven't met yet. After Naru said that, she watched as Rwby would thinking over what she said. That was until her fox ears perk up at hearing a match being lit, then turned to see a familiar girl with black hair and a bow on top sitting up against wall, book in her hand and a candle on top a small stool that she was using for light. Rwby had noticed the sudden light within the dark room, so she sat up and saw the same girl that Naru was looking over. That girl, Rwby said, as she remembered meeting her at the front entrance earlier in the morning. Yang, after recovering from the small hit from the pillow, would sat up, then looked over to where Rwby and Naru were looking before turning to her sister. You know her? She asked, and Naru would answer for the redhead before she could. Well, no, but she was there when I met up with Rwby this morning. She seems a bit odd. But before I could say anything, she left. The fox faunus explained before turning to her girlfriend to see a grin-like smile on her face that Naru could pretty much guess what's about to happen. Welp, now's your chance, she said as Yang got up and grabbed Rwby's arm to pull her up, surprising the young redhead before she started struggling in protest as Yang dragged her over to where the girl was. Naru could only roll her eyes at her girlfriend's attempt, so seeing as she wasn't going to get any sleep sooner, the fox girl got up and followed her sisters. The girl continued to read the book in her hand before she heard a noise heading her way. Moving her amber eyes up, she could see Yang dragging Rwby over. That caused the girl to raise an eyebrow before Yang started up with a hello in a sing-song tone, then would pull her sister up to her side. Getting a closer look at the younger girl, she lowered her book down so that she could speak. Aren't you that girl that almost exploded along with another girl with a hood over her head? She asked as Rwby was facing away from her with arms crossed until she realized that she was being asked. That made the redhead surprised and turned around back. Yeah. My name's Rwby, and that was Naru you mentioned, but you can call me actically, just call me Rwby, she said with a nervous laugh while rubbing the back of her head with her hand. The girl would stare at her with her amber eyes for a moment before looking back down to her book while responding with only a sound before Yang turned to her sister. What are you doing? She asked in a rather loud whisper tone, and Rwby answered her with her own. I don't know. Help me, she said, and both sisters turned back to the girls to give her friendly smiles as Yang spoke up. So yeah, I'm Yang, Rwby's older sister. What's your name? The brawler asked just as Naru had arrived and was soon standing next to her girlfriend's left side, while the girl would only let out an annoyed sigh before looking back up. Blake, the girl now known as Blake, said. However, upon looking at Naru, her amber eyes went wide upon seeing the girl's red fox ears on top of her blonde hair. Naru saw the look that Blake was giving her that caused an eyebrow to raise in curiosity. Something wrong, Blake? Naru asked her, which caused Blake to get out of her surprised state and shook her head. No, nothing, just didn't realize that you were a faunus, you know, being as you had a hood over your head, the black-haired girl said. Rwby and Yang looked at each other with confused looks for a moment until Yang would speak up once more. So nice night, don't you think? She said, trying to make conversation before Blake turned her attention back to the sisters. Yes, it's lovely, almost as lovely as this book that I will continue to read as soon as you leave, Blake said, giving out hints to the trio as Naru got before turning to both Yang and Rwby. Yeah, I'm getting the feeling that this is not working out well, she said as Yang had a small frown and nodded in agreement with her girlfriend. Rwby, however, had another thought as she spoke to Blake. What's it about? Your book? The younger girl asked as this caught Blake off guard as she looked up at the redhead in front of her, who seemed to be taking interest in the book in Blake's hand. Well, it's about a man with two souls, each fighting for control over his body. As Blake explained this, Naru took the time to look over the girl while Rwby had her attention. Taking a look at Blake's bow, Naru had seen some of the girls in the room from earlier. Some had wore hair accessories to keep their hair out of the way or in style, and looking into the room now, the fox faunus had seen that every girl's head was not wearing one in their sleep. Blake, however, was still wearing hers. That made Naru suspicious, plus she thought she saw the bow moved a little earlier, and not only that, thanks to her faunus animal senses of smell, Naru could tell that Blake had eaten tuna a lot. From what Naru can tell, just as she was about to connect the dots on her theories, Naru's thoughts were interrupted by Yang's voice. Oh, I'm so proud of my baby sister. Naru turned in time to see that Yang had grabbed Rwby in a bear hug, which the young girl had one arm free as she cried out, cut it out. Before punching Yang's face, and the sisters disappeared into cloud of smoke with limbs sticking out as sounds of fighting and Yang giggling along with some cat fight sounds were made as Naru sighed in annoyance. Before moving in to separate the sisters, Blake watched this with a small amusing smile on her face as watched as Naru managing to pull the sisters apart to end the fight. Well, Rwby, Yang, Naru. It's a. Before Blake could finish up, another familiar voice entered the scene. What in the world is going on over here? Don't you realize some of us are trying to sleep? Weiss had said, wearing her own nightgown while leading her white hair being let down. However, upon seeing who it was along with the trio of girls, they all had wide eyes in shock. Oh, not you again. Weiss, Yang, and Naru had all said at once at the same time. Rwby, however, could only quickly place her finger over her lips to quiet them down. Shoo. Girls, she's right, people are trying to sleep, the young redhead said while Naru was still glaring at the heiress. Weiss, however, ignored it and turned to the silver-eyed girl with her own icy blue eyes in a glare. Oh, now you're on my side? She asked while Rwby would wave her arms up and down quickly in defense. I was always on your side. She told the white-hair girl until Yang would speak up, coming to her sister's defense. Yeah. What's your problem with my sister and my girlfriend? The brawler asked as her lilac eyes would soon turn red as she argued with the heiress. Wait, did you just say girlfriend? Weiss nearly screamed. That caused both her and Blake to be surprised by what Yang had said. However, during their argument, Blake had closed her book after saving a spot where she left it off, then proceed to grab her candle so that she could blow out and head to bed. But just as she took a small breath in to blow, Yang had made the statement of girlfriend, and was too late to stop herself to ask when Blake blew out the candle and darkness filled in the ballroom for the rest of the night. Naru found herself sitting at one of the tables within the cafeteria of Signal Academy all alone, while every other students were seated at other tables talking to one another. One of the students had asked her to join them at their table, but Naru kindly reasoned why was because they were all faunas like her that are sitting on one side of the room while the other students were all humans. And the fox faunas would rather not take part in neither group if things went bad, even if they were in school. So here she was sitting by herself and eating her meal while hearing conversations going on from each group, both of which were talking horrible racial stuff about each other, until she noticed that someone had set their own tray of food down across from her. Hi, mind if I sit right here? Naru looked up to see a girl with blonde hair like hers, only long and messy looking, along with lilac eyes, while the girl was currently smiling at the faunus girl. Sure you can, Naru said as she watched the girl sat down on the other side of the table then began eating her food. Okay, I got to ask, why sit with me? She asked. The girl would look up with food in her mouth then mumble something until she realized that Naru didn't understand her, so she swallowed and spoke again. Sorry, anyways, you were just sitting here all alone, thought you can use some company. She said before popping a tater tot into her mouth that she had on her plate. So you're not bothered that I'm, Naru asked as she pointed her finger to her fox ears that made a twitching move as the girl would stare at her while chewing her food before swallowing it. Nope, she said with a popping sound with her mouth when she said that. We're here at Signal training and attempting to go to Beacon to become huntsmen, whether human or faunus. See, in a couple years my sister is gonna attend to Signal as well because she wants to be a huntress like I want to be a huntress as well. Which is awesome, but sucks that she's only 2 years younger and could not join this year, but would have been awesome if she did. Before the girl would continue, Naru held her hands up for her to stop when the faunus realized something. Whoa, wait a second, aren't you that same girl that almost blew up Professor Crow's weapons designer's lab class? Naru asked as the girl had a blush on her face and grabbed her long blonde hair that she started stroking it with her hands in embarrassment. A long story short, there were too much red dust involvement that nearly destroyed the class, which thankfully no one was hurt. Yeah, welp, on the bright side I didn't get burned too badly, just a week's worth of detention, she said in a low sad voice while Naru would only stare at her with her sapphire eyes then just blink a couple times as she speak. Was that a pun you made just now? The fox faunus asked and the blonde hair girl gave her a grin-like smile before she nodded. You got that right, Foxy. The name's Yang Xiaolong, puntress in training. The girl now known as Yang gave Naru a salute in greet that followed by a wink to the faunus across that made Naru laugh a little before sticking out her hand to Yang. I'm Naru, Naru Namikaze, she said, which Yang would gladly took Naru's hand into her own and gave a handshake. I kinda like Foxy better. Well Foxy, I've got a feeling that this is a start of a beautiful friendship. Yang said with a big smile on her face while Naru herself would hung her head low and made a groan at the pun the other blonde girl made. What have I gotten myself into this time? Naru mumbled a question to herself. Flashback/dreamland end. Wake up sleepy butt. Naru's fox ears perk up at the sound of a girl's voice shouting across the room, which the faunus girl to groan then snuggled her face into her soft pillows so that she could go back to her dreamland, but found herself just enjoying the pillows that she was resting on. Soft and comfy, she mumbled in her sleep. Why thank you very much Foxy. Yang's voice was heard just enough for Naru's eyes to shot open wide, then saw where or more like who she was laying on that made the fox faunus jump back and sat down to look at a grinning Yang. Yang, was it you or me this time? Naru asked the blonde brawler. It was no surprise that Naru found herself waking up of nuzzling her face into Yang's chest, being as it wasn't the first time. Either it's because Yang would pull Naru in to cuddle her during sleep, or that Naru moved on her own during her slumber sometime in the middle of the night. Oh, I don't know, it was pretty late and couldn't remember much after going to bed, then next morning found you where you were just a moment ago. Not that I blame you for rubbing your face in though. I'd do the same thing if I was you, plus I got to play with your ears a little. You were so cute when you made a face that you enjoy while in your sleep, Yang explained while Naru would blush a little before getting back up to her feet. Well, no sense of just laying around, best get up and dress then get some breakfast before. Where's Rwby? Naru asked her girlfriend as both blondes looked around the room for the young redhead until a muffled noise was made from under Yang. Quickly getting up to her feet, Yang along with Naru looked down to see Rwby laying face down with her arms and legs spread out. Both blondes looked at each other for a moment before turning back to Rwby as Yang spoke up first. Rwby, you alright sis? She asked her sister as Rwby would turn her head enough for them to see her face, while Naru can only thought of one theory. Both Yang and herself must have rolled on top of Rwby and slept on her the whole night. I can't feel my legs and arms and my back is sore, the young girl could only groan, which Yang would knelt down and help her sister up so that she could walk off the numbness for the limbs to move again, while Naru would walk beside the two sisters and rubbed Rwby's back to ease the pain. Beacon Cafeteria. After getting Rwby to ease her morning soreness, then getting dressed up in fresh clothes for the day, the three girls were sitting at a table eating breakfast along with John that soon joined them before initiation starts in a few hours. Naru was having a light breakfast of a small stack of pancakes along with an apple on the side. She was just finished with her pancakes and was currently eating her apple until she heard someone talking that made the blonde faunus looked up to see the same couple she saw yesterday. The ginger-hair girl seemed to be talking with her mouth full of pancakes next to the boy that had a calm yet annoyed look on his face that the girl was speaking to. That's when Naru watched him look up to see that she was staring at him as he gave what looked like an apologetic look on his face before he continued with his meal while the girl still talked to him. Taking another look around, Naru saw Blake sitting alone at another table far from Naru's group with a book in one hand that she was reading while another held what looked like a glass of milk. The fox faunus had raised an eyebrow in suspicion of what Blake really was but decided not to voice it out, so she moved on to her observation until her eyes narrowed when she spotted Weiss, who too sat by herself, and was having what appeared to be an elegant breakfast meal that Naru could not describe what from a distance. Hey Naru, you alright? Hearing John's voice brought Naru's attention that made her turn to see that her group were staring at her. The fox faunus was caught up in observing the room that she didn't realize that she didn't listen to what they were saying. Huh? Yeah, I'm fine really, was there something you needed? Naru asked, feeling a bit embarrassed that she doesn't know what topic they were all on while eating breakfast. Rwby was able to answer her. We were talking about rumors of being paired up to form teams, or at least having partners, or something, I don't know. We wanted to hear your opinion, the young girl said while both John and Yang waited for Naru's response. Well, if it is true, the real question is on how. Like, do we get to pick? Is it random? That sort of questions. Naru spoke out her thoughts to them until Yang would throw her arm around her girlfriend's shoulder and pulled her close. Well, if that's the case, then I know who I'm picking for a partner. the blonde brawler said until Rwby pops in between them, forcing both blondes to separate quickly. Now hold on just a sec. What happens if it is random? What if I get partnered up with somebody that I don't know or like? The young girl said with a panic tone in her voice as she starts listing out the possibilities of what-ifs as Yang tried to calm her down. Leaning towards Naru direction, John would lower his voice in a whispering tone. Has she always been like this? He asked her as Naru looked at the sisters for a moment, then back to the blonde-hair boy to answer him. Something like this. Rwby did something similar on her first day of going to Signal. She had stayed in bed pretending to be sick before Yang had to drag her off. Give them a minute or 15. I'm gonna go on ahead and get my gear ready, Naru said as she got up as John nodded and turned back to the sisters with Yang now holding on to Ruby's shoulders and started shaking the young girl to stop her ranting. With one hand holding the now half-eaten apple, Naru walked up to the exit and would soon head to her destination until the corner of her eye caught something that made her turn her head and her lips form a frown. One of the students, a boy wearing what appeared to be silver gray armor, was sitting at a table flicking crumbs of food towards a faunus bunny girl sitting at another table across from him and seemed to be bothered by it that she would turn around and asked him to stop, only for the boy to ignore and continue doing what he did. Looking down at the fruit in her hand, Naru would shrug her shoulders before turning her head back in the direction, then with a flick of her wrist the fox faunus sent the apple flying across the room and struck on the side of the boy's head that caused him to fall off his seat and hit the floor with a thud sound, and nearby students started laughing, including the bunny faunus as well. Satisfied, Naru exited out the cafeteria just as Carden got up and looked in the direction where the apple came from. Gear locker area. Not exactly sure what it's so gonna stick with that. Naru had reached her destination and entered inside the room. However, she was surprised to see she was not the first one, as someone else had the same idea as hers. Standing in front of an open locker was a tall red-headed girl, unlike Ruby's being as her hair was a lighter shade and long that is held up in a ponytail. Wearing bronze and brown armor like gear, as the girl turned to the faunus direction when Naru first entered. Oh, hello there. I didn't think anyone would come in here this early, the girl spoke up as Naru would glance over at the clock to see that they still have an half-hour left before initiation starts. I'm sure everyone else will come in shortly in a few minutes. I'm just here to check up on my gear. I don't think we met before. I'm Naru, the fox faunus introduced herself as the red-headed girl gave a friendly smile. I'm Pyrrha. It's nice to meet you, Naru, the girl now known as Pyrrha said as Naru smiled and nodded her head before making her way towards her locker where her gear was stored, while Pyrrha would turn back to hers and resume to what she was doing. Putting in the passcode to unlock, Naru opened her locker to see Tempest laying there along with a utility belt with 4 medium-sized pouches on it. Each pouch contained different types of ammunition for Tempest's gun mod. Before the year she left Signal, one of the professors had taught her about how certain types of dust can be used, and with extreme caution, and created for the person's use, such as making incinerate bullets from fire dust that can be activated using aura. Naru has 4 types: normal, armor-piercing, incinerate, and cryo. Normal would be her standard regular bullets, while the other 3 were made using 3 different types of dust that Naru uses in situations that would be needed. Making sure that everything was in place, Naru would grab the utility belt and wrapped it around her waist to put on. Then she would grab Tempest and change both tunfas into a single revolver form as she started loading it with the normal ammunition before pausing a moment till Naru turned to Pyrrha. Wait, aren't you the Pyrrha Nikos? Didn't you win the Mistral regional tournament 4 years straight then on a cover of a cereal box? The fox faunus asked as Pyrrha would looked away to the side, a little embarrassed that someone she didn't know heard of her. Yeah, it was fun for a bit, but sadly the cereal wasn't that good, the red-headed Spartan girl said as Naru could only shiver at the memory when she first tried it. Yeah, you're right, but I'm sure that someone must have loved that cereal somewhere, Naru stated as she finished loading Tempest up, then would turn the gun back into the twin tunfas, then folded them up as she strapped both in place on each of her thighs. And right before the two would start up another conversation, the door lead to enter/exit the locker room was kicked open by Yang, who would look around the room before spotting a certain faunus that made her rush inside and scoop Naru up in a bear hug. There you are. Thought you can slip away from me this time, huh, Foxy? The brawler said while Naru's face was turning a slight blue color from the lack of air, while Rwby, John, and everyone else would enter in and made their way to their respectful lockers to get their gear. Yang, please, need air. Naru managed to cry out in distress, which leaves to Rwby to come to the Fox Faunus girl's rescue once again. Yang, can you please let go of Naru? Her face is changing blue like a blueberry and she looks like she's about to blow up. The young girl said with a bit of panic in her tone of voice from seeing Naru's face, which Yang took notice that she would let go, and Naru gasped loudly as feeling air going into her lungs again. Whoops, sorry about that Foxy, didn't want to pop your. Yang would have continued if Naru hadn't quickly placed her fingers over her lips to silence her while the Faunus continue catching her breath till she can speak once more. Yang, that pun you were about to say is not funny, and not only that, but not in front of the innocents, Naru told her before removing her fingers from the blonde's lips, while Rwby would look back and forth between the two girls with a confused look on her face. Huh? I don't get it, what are you talking about? She asked before Naru would pull the hood of her cloak over her head, which the young girl would quickly take off and glared her silver eyes at the older teen, which Naru would give her a small smile before answering. Oh, you'll learn one day, Rwby, when you're older. Just don't do what your sister does or else you'll end up just like her, Naru said before turning back to the locker. However, she also saw the couple earlier with the girl still talking to the boy that were across from her locker. Yang would place her hands onto her hips and had a frown on her lips while she stared at her girlfriend. What's that supposed to mean? The blonde brawler would ask as the Fox Faunus would only turn her head and just at her for a moment before answering her. One of you is enough. Two is way too many was all Naru would say before turning her attention back to her own locker while the sisters would get their gear. While she making one last check-up, Naru's fox ears would pick up on the conversation behind her, and the ginger-hair girl was making some suggestions of how she and the boy would be remain on the same team. Together, the Faunus can only guess that they were either old childhood friends or a couple in a secret relation. She did pick up their names when the teen boy called out Nora, while said girl would respond by saying run before the couple would soon walked away with Nora making giggle noises along the way. Now that they were away, Naru did had a questionable thought that ran in her head when she closed her locker. I wonder what noise sloths do make. She wondered before closing her locker shut, then made her way to the sisters that she soon joined in the conversation they were having while Rwby was hugging a folded form of crescent rose. No more awkward small talk or getting to know you stuff. Today I get to let my baby do the talking, the young girl said while cuddling the weapon in her arms, which made Naru roll her eyes and smiled in amusement before her girlfriend would respond to her sister. Well, remember Rwby, you're not the only one going through initiation. If you want to grow up, then you're going to have to meet new people and learn to work together with them, the blonde brawler had said, which caused Rwby to have an irritated look on her face, then lets out a frustrated groan while she put Crescent Rose away and closed her locker shut. Ugh, you sound like Dad. Okay, first of all, what does meeting people have to do with fighting? The younger girl asked as Naru answered her. A lot of huntsman and huntress can work well together, watch each other's backs, and building trust with people, you know, the fauna said as Rwby thought of it for a moment before nodding. Okay, good point. Oh, and stop helping Naru. And secondly, I don't need people to help me grow up, I drink milk. The redhead said with pride. Naru, however, could only snicker at the last part at how childish that sounded before she coughed lightly to calm herself down a bit. Okay then, but what about when we form teams? If the rumors about it are true, then what are you gonna do about it? Naru asked as Rwby would have an unsure look on her face before she looked away nervously. Well, I don't know, I'll just be on your team or Yang's, or we can all be, I guess, Rwby answered her. Yang, however, looked uncertain that this would help get her sister out of her shell of meeting new people, so she made a comment of her own. Maybe you should try being on someone else's team, Rwby, Yang said as she grabbed her own hair and began stroking it with her hands while having a nervous look on her face. Hearing her sister say this gotten Rwby to look at her with a surprised look, then would turn to upset enough for the younger girl to walk up and pointed a accused finger at the blonde. My dearest sister, Yang, are you implying that you or Naru do not wish to be on the same team as me? Rwby asked as Naru would raise an eyebrow while looking back and forth between the two sisters. The who and what now? Naru asked, but she was ignored when Yang would raise her hands up in defensive from seeing her younger sister's look on her face. What? No. Of course I do, I just thought, I dunno, maybe it will help you break out of your shell. Yang said as Naru would only sigh and shook her head at her girlfriend's choice of words. Surprised by this once more, Rwby burst out in anger. What the dash? I don't need to break out of my shell. That's absolutely. Before Rwby could finish her sentence, Jaune walked past the three girls while reading a paper in his hand. Ridiculous. There's no way I put my gear in 636 yesterday. I would have remembered having to count that high. Oh, why does this have to happen today? The blonde-hair boy said as he continued desperately search for his locker while the three girls would stare at him for a moment till Naru spoke up. It's 3 rows down on your left, Jaune. The fox faunus called out as Jaune stopped and looked to where she had said till he finally found it. Oh right, thanks. He told her, now feeling a bit embarrassed to himself before he would start working on getting it open and grab his gear out. Seeing that was settled, Naru would turn her attention back to the youngest sister. Okay Rwby, I can understand that this might be difficult, but Yang does have a point. Making new friends may not be that easy, but that doesn't mean you should not stop trying no matter how badly it might end up. And if we do form teams, we'll cross that bridge together when that day comes, okay? Naru asked the young redhead. Rwby was quiet for a moment to think over, and she was starting to doubt herself about it, so Naru added a bit of fuel to the fire. I'll make you chocolate chip cookies if you do, she said, and that caused Rwby's silver eyes to sparkle in excitement as she hugged the faunus girl. Okay, I'll do it, thanks Naru. Rwby said before removing herself from hugging Naru. Then Yang would soon hug her girlfriend from behind with her head leaning over Naru's shoulder and giving a quick peck on the faunus cheek. You sure do know how to sweet talk her, Foxy. Then again, you were always the sweet talker, Yang told her while Naru groaned at the bad pun her girlfriend made. Right before the trio would continue their conversation till they heard Jaune cry out, followed by a panging sound and Pyrrha calling out an apology. The girls turned to see the blonde boy pinned to the wall with what looked to be a bronze and red-colored spear that pinned the hoodie of Jaune's jacket, holding him in place. When they heard Glinda Goodwich's voice over the intercom for all first-year students to head to Beacon Cliff for initiation, everyone started to leave as Naru and the sisters made their over to their male friend. Just as Weiss passed by, giving him a disapproval look till she walked off, then followed by Pyrrha, who had grabbed the spear-like weapon and pulled it off, causing Jaune to slump down onto the floor. It was nice to meet you, Jaune. The red-headed girl told him with a small smile on her face till she followed the Schnee heiress out of the locker room. Naru looked down at Jaune for a moment, then turned her head where Pyrrha walked off, then back down to the blonde-hair boy again. You know, I think she likes you. Hearing the fox faunus words caused Jaune to perk up and look at her. Who, Weiss? The question the blonde boy made caused Naru to nearly face-fault onto the floor if she hadn't stopped herself from letting that happen. And not exactly who, what happened exactly? She asked in curiosity along with Yang and Rwby, while Jaune would only hung his head down in disappointment. I don't understand. My dad said all women look for his confidence. Where did I go wrong? He asked just as Rwby and Naru would help him up and threw his arms over their shoulders to help carry him while Yang answered. Snow Angel wasn't the best start, the blonde brawler said as she walked along beside Naru as she and her sister walked Jaune out of the locker. Come on Jaune, let's go, Rwby told him while Naru would turn to her girlfriend to whisper to her. Doesn't he know that Weiss was being sarcastic yesterday? She asked, which Yang's answer was only a shrug on her shoulders that she doesn't know either, as the four friends made their way to their destination, Beacon Cliff. When they arrived, they saw Ojban and Goodwich standing in front of the view that showed the Emerald Forest. The four would soon separate and stood on their stone platings on the ground along with the other students that showed up. Naru took a look to her left to see that she was at the far end with Jaune standing on her left, followed by Rwby, then Yang. And so on till she heard a light coughing that made her turn to see Glinda was staring at her with a stern look that told her to pay attention before Ojban started speaking up after taking a sip of his mug in hand. For years, you have trained to become warriors, and today your abilities will be evaluated in the Emerald Forest. The headmaster started, then Goodwich would soon take over next. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard rumors about the assignment of teams. Well, allow us to put an end to your confusion. Each of you will be given teammates today. The older blonde said as she adjusted her glasses. When she paused a moment, Naru's fox ears perk up under her hood when she heard Rwby groan out, now thinking that she wished she'd taken back about what she told the younger girl, as Ojban would continue on. These teammates will be with you for the rest of your time here at Beacon, so it is in your best interest to be paired with someone whom you can work well. That being said, The first person you make eye contact with will be your partner for the next 4 years. As he said that, Naru could have sworn she heard the sounds of broken glass in the background as she quickly looked around to see where it came from but could find nothing. What? But she did hear that from Rwby when she cried out in disbelief, and now the fox faunus was really feeling bad for the young girl of the possibility of having partners she might not get along with, especially if it's a certain heiress. Once you partnered up, make your way to the northern end of the forest. You will meet opposition along the way. Do not hesitate to destroy everything in your path or you will die. Ashbin paused a moment of his speech to take another sip of his mug, which Naru had wondered how much coffee he has left in or wondering what he was drinking, before he resumed. You will be monitored and graded for the duration of your initiation, but our instructors will not intervene. You will find an abandoned temple at the end of the path containing several relics. Each pair must choose one and return to the top of the cliff. We will regard that item as well as your standing and grade you appropriately. Any questions? As Ashbin finished his speech, Naru would notice that John would raise his hand up. Good, now, take your positions. The headmaster said as everyone, except for John, got into a battle-like stance position. Sir, I've got a question. Are you like dropping us off in the forest somewhere or something? Naru heard John beside her while catapulting sounds were made and she saw students flying forward in mid-air above the forest as the fox faunus had her hands hovering over the twin folds of her weapons ready to grab them. No, you will be falling, Ashbin answered the blonde boy as Naru heard the launching sounds getting closer along with Nora cheering sound being made. Oh, did you hand out parachutes for us? John's question made Naru roll her eyes under her hood. If they had hand out parachutes he would have known by now. No, you will be using your own landing strategy, Ashbin once again answered his question. Naru took a moment to look to the side for a sec to see Yang giving her and Rwby a quick wink as she put on some sunglasses before she was launched into the air. Rwby turned to Naru and just gave a smile for good luck, as she too followed her sister into the air. Then Naru would quickly face the front knowing that she was next as soon as John would go. So, what exactly is a land strategy? John cried out when he was sent flying into the air as Naru lowered herself down farther ready and then nothing happened. As she watched as the students going farther away in a distance, Naru had a confused look as she looked down at her plate then back up to the professors. I think mine is broken, the fox faunus said this, but Glinda just shook her head at her. No, I'm afraid not, Ms. Namikaze. Professor Ashbin has instructed to hold yours for a moment to talk to you as the older blonde woman said this. Naru turned to the headmaster himself. Naru, when you land head straight to the temple, there is one relic that will be specifically just for you but hidden from the others. You'll know when you see it. As Ashbin said this, Naru had a even more puzzled look on her face of what he said. Wait, what do you mean? Bloody hellll. Naru screamed when she let her guard down for a second. Just her own plate went off and sent her flying into the air as Ashbin would turn back to the forest as he took another sip from his mug. The emerald forest seemed calm and peaceful during the early morning. A black bird that's shape was similar to a nevermore but smaller was flying through the air, flapping its wings and sailing through the open air. All seemed calm and peaceful to the small feather creature until a red and black blur crashed against it at a great speed, causing it to shriek out, and was replaced by its feathers that were now falling, giving the meaning of the bird's end. Birdie, no! Rwby cried out as she continued during her fall. Not too far from the young redhead, Naru was feeling the wind blowing past her during her fall at a rapid pace. She slightly cursed Professor Ashbin for her slight 1-second distraction before she was launched into the air, but right now the blonde faunus had to come up with a landing without hurting herself too badly. Seeing that she was coming closer to the branches of the trees, Naru would quickly use her aura to activate her semblance. Once she felt it was ready, Naru would quickly position herself in mid-air with her feet pointing forward along with her knees brought up to her chest as the fox faunus waited at the last second when she was close to the nearest branch as she kicked her legs out. When her feet made contact to the wooden branch, her aura burst out in an orange color, then leaped away from the branch till she landed on another, and repeat the process at a quick speed before Naru did a landing roll on the ground that she soon stopped in a position where she was down on one knee and had Tempest out in its gun form as the faunus did a quick scan of her surroundings. While she remained in her position, Naru's semblance still remained active. if anyone had appeared right at the moment they would see a orange aura that was visible around Neru's body with two shapes on top of her head, that were long like rabbit ears and another behind her in shape of a long tail while the faunus eye pupils were slit like a cat. When active it grants Neru a boost of strength and speed as well as heighten her senses of smell, sound, and sight. However, there is also a price for such power. For every use Neru's muscle tissues would start to strain and cramp up slow at first until the next few minutes would increase. If remain active for long period of time the muscles within Neru's body would enter a mild paralysis state that would slow down her movements and feeling of ache for the next hour to rest. It was at the end of her 3rd year at Signal that Neru discovered her semblance and is one of the reasons why she skipped her final year to test its limits and power. She decided to call her semblance Kishjun. Neru would felt a slight pain running through her body, giving her the hint that the effects were starting, so she dropped her semblance and the orange shape aura around her body would vanish, yet the fox faunus remain alert to her surroundings. Slowly she would get back up on her 2 feet. However, the sounds of a leaf's ruffling within a bushes caught Neru's attention before she had to evade jump to the left when a spinning round object came out of the bushes and would have directly hit her had she not evaded the oncoming attack. Spinning around Neru would fire Tempest, hitting a few rounds at the spinning object, which the bullets deflect and bounce off from it until the object stopped spinning and landed on the ground to reveal it was a Borbotusk that attacked her. Really? Of all the Grimm in the Emerald Forest it had to be a wild pig. Oh well, at least I get to see how tough that armor of yours. As Neru said this she reached her hand into one of her pouches for her armor-piercing ammunition. However, the pig-like Grimm wasn't going to let her off as the Borbotusk would rush forward to attack her with its large tusk. Neru saw the Grimm charging at her, so she was forced to stop grabbing her ammo and change Tempest into the twin Tunfas that the faunus held them up in a defense position. Standing her ground, Neru waited at the last second as she spun around to dodge the Borbotusk that brayfly past her before she soon smacked the side of its head with the right Tonfa in her hand. However, because of the heavily armor platings, all it did was daze the Grimm for a second as the Borbotusk shook its head before turning around and thrust its head up in attempt to use its massive curved tusk to grapple onto Neru, but the faunus girl managed to leap over the boar to avoid the tusk, and when she landed on her feet Neru would strike at it again by swinging both of her Tunfas from left to right. The blows landed around on the Borbotusk body, a few times over on the head, but the Grimm boar would turn around and swung its tusk against Neru, which she raised both of her Tunfas up to block, but the impact force caused her to slide back on the dirt ground and she managed to keep her balance to remain standing on her own 2 feet. Okay, so not only heavily armored but strong as well. They're not called Grimm for nothing, so if I can't get to test my armor piercing for it then I'll just have to get it on its back to expose the underside, Neru thought to herself as the fox faunus saw that the Borbotusk was charging at her once again as Neru gotten into defense. However, just as it was about a halfway close the Grimm suddenly stopped in its tracks at a halt in its attack, then it lifted its head up as if something was amiss. Neru was confused by this sudden action, but she remained cautious and on guard in case the Grimm would resume attacking. But the strangest thing happened next was that the Borbotusk would let out a pig-like squeal as if in fright before turning around and running off in the forest away from her. For a while Neru remained in her stance till she slowly lowered it down while having a puzzled look on her face. That was strange. Grimm don't just leave their prey like that, do they? She asked out loud until she realized that she was the only one in the area. Right, what was I thinking of asking when no one's around? Well, I better get a move on. I wonder how the others are doing? Neru asked herself as she starts walking off while still having Tempest out in case either the Borbotusk would return to finish the job or any other Grimm showed up. Right as soon as she left, Neru didn't realize that a twin pair of glowing red eyes were seen within the dark shadowed area of the forest. The dark unknown creature would continue staring at the fox faunus retreating form before it lets out a small growl, then would proceed to follow her at a distance while waiting for a perfect chance to strike. With Rwby. In another part of the forest, Rwby had landed onto the forest floor for a brief second until she took off running as well as using her speed semblance. Gotta find Yang. Gotta find Yang. Gotta find Rwby paused her thoughts to shout out while she was running. Yang? Yayaning? The young redhead called out but had no luck as she kept moving when going back to her thoughts. Oh, this is bad, this is really bad. What if I can't find her or someone else finds her first? Well, there's Neru, but what are the odds that I would find her? Possibly not. Well, there's always John, he's nice and funny. Rwby was thinking back to how she and the blonde boy had met yesterday. Then a image of him being attacked by a pack of wolves and lost. But I don't think he's very good in a fight though. Oh, what about Blake? So mysterious, so calm, plus she likes books. A smile formed on Ruby's lips at the thought, then suddenly frown when another image of her talking to Blake and the black-haired girl slowly moving away from her. Then again, I'm not sure I'd be able to hold a conversation with her. Ugh, stay focused, Rwby. Who else do you know in this school? There's Yang, Naru, John, Blake, and as Rwby thought of this she noticed something white up ahead that caused the young girl to put on the emergency brakes with her feet as she slid hard onto the ground and nearly hit Weiss. When Rwby had finally stopped she was looking at the ground for a moment, then slowly she would look up as her silver eyes had met Weiss' icy blue eyes. The heiress stared at the young redhead in silence as Ruby's lips would slowly turn into a friendly smile, thinking that this might be a good opportunity for them to start over before it quickly dropped when Weiss had turned sharply away and started walking off. Wait! Where are you going? We're supposed to be teammates, Rwby said sadly as she looked back down and kicked at the dirt with her feet. Weiss grunted in pain and let out an annoyed groan when she was trying to pass through the bushes. Just when she got out then started dusting herself off, the white-haired girl heard a struggling noise above her, so she looked up to see John being pinned high up in a tree with Pyrrha's weapon on his hoodie. John himself would notice Weiss staring up at him, so the blonde boy would make a nervous laugh and wave at the heiress before watching her turn back around and headed straight back to Rwby, who was still feeling sad at being abandoned by the white-haired girl. By no means does this makes us friends, Weiss told Rwby when she grabbed the redhead's hooded cape and starts dragging her off. You came back. Rwby shouted cheerfully despite of being dragged off by the Schnee heiress. Unfortunately they were also leaving John behind, who was still stuck, and watched them leave as he tried calling to them until Pyrrha would arrive and get him down. When they were far enough away Weiss let go of Ruby's cape, which caused the young girl to fall and dropped onto her ass rudely, and continued walking off till Rwby quickly got back to her feet while asking the heiress what's the hurry. As she went to catch up, I will not let my mission be delayed because you're too slow, I swear, if I get a bad grade because of what the dash. Weiss shouted in fright when Rwby suddenly appeared in front of her when using her semblance. I'm not slow, see. You don't have to worry about me. Weiss, just because I don't know how to deal with people like Naru or my sister, but doesn't mean I don't know how to deal with monsters. As Rwby said, she wrapped an arm around the heiress' shoulders, while Weiss herself had her arms crossed and an annoyed look on her face once again at Ruby's childish behavior, as she continued, You're about to see a whole different side of me today. And after all of this is over, you're gonna be like, wow, that Rwby girl is really, really cool and I wanna be her friend. As Rwby said this she wrapped her red cape around herself and disappeared out of thin air with rose petals falling down in her face as Weiss remained where she stood until she heard movement within the bushes, thinking it was the young redhead. You may be fast, but you still excel at wasting time, Rwby? The Schnee heiress called out when she got no answer. The noises of the bushes movement continued as this was making Weiss a little nervous now. Rwby? She called out once more, but the only response she gotten were not one but multiple pairs of red eyes coming from the bushes until Weiss saw a Beowulf had slowly crept out of its hiding place as the Grim started growling at the white-haired girl. Rwby! Weiss cried out as the Beowulf roared at her. With Yang. In another part of the Emerald Forest, Yang was walking through what appeared to be a fog-like area as the blonde brawler had been alone for a long while without seeing anyone since landing. Right now everything seemed to be quiet with the exception of birds chirping right above her head, but Yang herself was getting bored of it. Hello. She called out, missing a shadowy figure that passed behind her that soon disappeared. Is anyone out there? Hello? I'm getting bored here. She tried calling out once more, yet still no response as she rubbed the back of her head with her hand. Man, and this is one of the times I wish Naru was here. She always fun for entertainment and kill boredom, the brawler thought as certain dirty thoughts came to her mind that involved Naru and herself. That was enough to cause Yang to blush and had a grin-like smile on her lips till the sound of a twig snapping snapped her out of it and turned to the direction it came from. Is someone there? Yang asked as she made her way over to the bushes where she thought the sound came from as the brawler pushed the leaves to the side. Rwby. Foxy. Is that you or either of you? She asked, however Yang's answer was having a stare down with a growling Ursa right in front of her. Nope. Yang said with a popping sound added to her when she said that. Right as soon as the Ursa swiped its left claw out, Yang back flipped away to avoid the grim-like bear before it would attack again. Getting into her fighting stance, she activated her Ember Celica, the name of Yang's dual-range shot gauntlets, and was about to fire at the Ursa. However, the corner of her right eye caught glimpse of a second one that was about to blind-side attack her, which Yang would duck and rolled out of the way, then turned to face the two grim. The first Ursa that Yang met charged forward to attack just as the blonde brawler would cocked her right arm back. A clicking sound was made from her gauntlet, then punched straight into the Ursa's chest when it was within close range, and a sound of a shotgun fire was made upon impact as a red burst was made. The Ursa was sent flying back after the hit, while the second one would run up to strike at the blonde, however was stopped when Yang would punch it under its chin to send the grim up in mid-air for a second. Then Yang would strike a couple more hits onto the chest, sending the Ursa to rolling backwards towards the first one. You guys wouldn't happen to see a girl in a red hood, would you? Or maybe another one, but attractive and with cute fox ears? Yang asked the two Ursas when she managed to stop fighting for a moment. However, all she gotten for an answer was a growl and roar from both grim. Well, you could have just say no. The blonde brawler managed to say out loud while dodging from both Ursas when they attacked her once again. Yang continued to duck, dodge, and rolled out of the way from the Grimm's attack while making no attempts to strike back. In fact, the blonde brawler was toying with it. Creatures of Grimm were seen as monsters to the eyes of those that live within the four kingdoms of Remnant and are to be taken caution when facing one wet air bigs ones or small ones. So normally, even when facing a Ursa, let alone two of them, a huntsman should always be cautioned no matter how skilled they were, with the possible of one mistake could be their deaths. Yet here Yang was taking caution extremely lightly and laughing after she back-flipped feet away from the Grimm like bears, which they soon stopped their attacks when realizing their prey would only continue avoiding damage and try to think anew to strike. Geez, you two couldn't hit the broad side of a. Yang was about to make a sarcastic comment or pun when she suddenly froze up. Lilac eyes careful watched a single golden blonde hair slowly floated down from mid-air that would soon landed on the grass ground, completely visible among the sea of green. Yang continued to stare in silence at the single hair thread as a random memory came to her mind. Flashback begin, 3 years ago. On the island of Patch, which is west of Vale, where not only the location of Signal Academy but also there is the household of the Xiao Long residence that was Yang and Ruby's home. It was around mid-afternoon on a Saturday, being as Signal was closed for students and teachers on weekends. Both Yang and Naru were in the backyard area. Both blondes were in their second year at Signal, and Naru had gotten to know the family quite well, even though knowing that Taeyong and Crow, Ruby and Yang's father and uncle, are also her teachers at Signal. However, they were always kind and willing to help Naru whenever she asked. Right now Taeyong had taken Ruby out to Vale, so that left Yang alone with her uncle and Naru keeping her company. Now the two young teen girls were in the backyard having a little friendly spare while Crow was inside the house making lunch, with both using prototype versions of their soon-to-be weapons a few years later after Signal and go on to Beacon. Naru ducked down at the incoming gauntlet right fist that Yang swung as the fox faunus swung her left tonfa upwards for an uppercut. A metal clang noise was made when Yang would use her left arm to block the attack, and the tonfa collided with the gauntlet for a brief second, then would push it to the side enough to leave Naru open for the brawler to swing a right hooked punch, only for the faunus to swing her own right to push the incoming fist to the side, causing Yang to miss and Naru managing to spin around and kick at Yang's back. The brawler stumbled forward after the kick but was able to recover when she rolled on the grass ground, then quickly get back up to her feet and sprang back up to her feet with arms raised to a defensive position. Same with Naru when she saw Yang getting back up to her feet. Both were staring down at each other, not moving an inch, until a sudden growl coming from Yang's stomach was made, which caused a small blush to appear on her face. Then she laughed a little as well as dropping her stance, which Naru did the same but had an amused smile on her lips. For a second there I thought that was the sound of a nearby Grimm, if I hadn't carefully heard coming from where, Naru said as she slightly pointed at her fox ears that perked up a bit, which Yang made a small laugh once more before responding to her. Well, Foxy, working out a sweat with you so much can cause the appetite, which is what I like best about you, so let's go see what Uncle Crow made, Yang said as she took off her prototype gauntlets off, which Naru would put both of her tonfas away. I hope it's ramen this time. I haven't had a single bowl of it in weeks since they closed my favorite restaurant for redecorating, Naru said, which the fox faunus girl let out a disappointed sigh before feeling Yang threw her arm over Naru's shoulder and pulling her in for comfort. Hey now, don't let sad thoughts enter in that noodle brain of yours, Foxy, Yang said with a bright smile at the bad pun she just made. Naru turned her head to respond to that terrible bun when she stopped for a moment. When Yang had pulled Naru in with her arm, about a quarter of her long messy golden hair got caught in between the two girls and Naru's face was pressed up against it. Now normally Yang wouldn't allow anyone else to touch her hair or risk bringing forth Yang's wrath. But at this moment the fauna sense of smell kicked in as she took a whiff of the sweet scent Yang's hair was giving off at this close range and feeling the slight softness against her skin when brushed against her face that Naru had to resist reaching up to touch it. Breaking out of her thoughts, Naru would shake her head and get out of Yang's grip from her arm, which the golden blonde brawler was confused and wondered if she did something wrong as Yang then wow'll see Naru just smile at her. You want to know what I like about you best now? And no, it's not about your puns, Naru said when she saw Yang was about to answer but paused when the fauna said that. Not going to let that keep her down, Yang would smile up when a new answer came to her. My stunning good looks? The blonde brawler playfully asked while giving out a standing pose to express her beauty, which caused Naru to chuckle a little at that. Well, there's that, yes, but there is something else too, Naru said as Yang had dropped her playful expression and listened to her friend as the faunus continued. It's your hair, Yang. It may look a mess being long and loose without brushing it, but I never smelt something sweet like that, and it felt very soft. Naru turned around away from the other blonde girl when she felt her face heated up so to avoid any embarrassing moments, but if the fox faunus hadn't turned away she would have saw Yang's blushing face as well. Flashback end. Yu Yang had finally spoke a little coldly after having that flashback but paused a moment to close her eyes. Then she reopened them, this time with both glowing red eyes as both Ursas look at each other in confusion at the sudden change of attitude from the golden blonde girl. You monsters! Yang screamed out as her entire body exploded in a burst of flames, then rushed forward at a new level of speed that almost matched Rwby's. This caught both Grimm by surprise as the fiery blonde girl started throwing fury of punches, with Ember Celica still active at the nearby Ursa with exploding flames bursting out from each punch until one hard right punch to the skull sent the bear Grimm flying back and crashing through multiple trees with a small trail of fire in its wake. Yang quickly turned her head to look behind, glaring her red eyes at the second Ursa that was about to attack her from behind but halted when it saw her glare. What? You want some too, huh? She yelled out at it in anger. Despite of watching its fellow brethren's death and the teen girl's sudden change in attitude, the Ursa would still roar at her in challenge and stood up on its back legs ready to strike her down. However, that wouldn't happen when something was thrown from behind, causing a squish-like sound, and the Ursa froze in place before it dropped forward on the ground and went motionless. Yang's eyes soon changed back to her lilac color and had a confused look on her face till she saw someone behind the dead Ursa. There, standing a few feet away, was Blake holding a black-like ribbon attached from around her right arm and to the pistol with a blade that she used to kill the Ursa from behind. With a quick tug, Blake retrieved her weapon, then would sheath it back as the black-hair girl would turn and gave Yang a small smile. The blonde brawler had a BLNK look on her face as she took a look at the dead Ursa, then back to Blake that she soon shrugged her shoulders. I could have taken him, she said to the other girl. With Weiss, the Schnee heiress slid backwards after blocking an incoming attack from a Beowulf, which she was soon surrounded by a pack of them, before standing back up and held Mertenaster in her left hand. Seeing as her supposed partner, Rwby Rose, is nowhere to be found, Weiss would have to face these creatures alone in order to defend herself. So the white-haired girl quickly got into her combat stance while having a firm grip on the hilt of her multi-dust rapier sword in her left hand. Alright, remember your training, Weiss. Head up, shoulders back, right foot forward, not that forward. Slow breathing, wait for the right moment, and Weiss thought to herself while narrowing her light blue eyes at the larger Beowulf, which could have been the alpha of the pack. Then she pulled Mertenaster back as its dust chamber spun and landed on a red color. Now, her thought screamed as Weiss used her glyph to push self straight towards the Beowulf with her weapon ready to strike until, ah, gotcha! Rwby suddenly appeared in Weiss' path, with crescent rose in hand that she used to strike at the Beowulf. The heiress' eyes went wide and in a panic state caused her to change her striking course as well as stumble on her feet to stop herself. Her actions caused her weapon to go active as a stream of fire shot out from her rapier from the red dust and the flames hit the nearest tree. Rwby got distracted by looking behind her to see what happened only to quickly block a random Beowulf's attack that caused her off guard and stumbled backwards, which she ended up bumping into Weiss. "Hey, watch it!" the young redhead said to the older teen. "Excuse me? You attacked out of turn, I could have killed you." Weiss shouted at her, clearly upset that Rwby had gotten in the way to make Weiss nearly hit her instead of the large Grimm she targeted. "You'll have to try a lot harder than that," Rwby muttered under her breath, enough for the heiress to not hear her. Seeing as the pack of Grimm were slowly closing in on the two girls, Rwby had to quickly reload a fresh clip of ammo for her SCYTH sniper weapon. However, the fire that Weiss caused was starting to spread quickly. Weiss, seeing a flaming tree that fallen down in front of the Alpha Beowulf, caused air to turn and grabbed Ruby's arm. "Come on, we have to go," she told the young girl, which she urged her to start running when she started dragging her off. The Beowulfs would have given chase, but being as the forest fire was spreading fast and cutting them off, the Alpha made a howling sound to order its pack to let them go and fall back so that they could escape. Themselves, once at a safe distance away, both girls were panting to catch their breath before Rwby spoken up first. "What was that? That should have been easy," she yelled at the heiress, very disappointed that she didn't get the chance of having some action by killing the pack of Grimm. Weiss had soon calmed her breathing down enough to turn around and glare at the young girl in front of her. "Well, perhaps if you had exercised even the slightest amount of caution with the placement of your strikes, I wouldn't have set the forest on fire," the heiress yelled back. That made the red-headed girl to step back at the tone while making a noise in protest. "What's that supposed to mean?" Rwby asked while watching Weiss would close her eyes and pink the bridge of her nose, letting out a frustrated sigh, then release herself so that she would open her eyes again to speak again. "I'm just surprised that Summoner, who talks so much, would communicate so little during an encounter we spoken," putting much strain into the words in her sentence as Rwby would folded her arms over her chest. "Well, I'm sorry that you need my help to win a fight, I'm just fine on my own." The redhead's words caused a small snot to be made from the heiress. "Well, congratulations on being the strongest child to sneak your way onto Beacon, bravo," Weiss sarcastically said as she turned around to leave. Rwby had picked up on the sarcastic comment had caused her face to grow red in anger at the Schnee heiress so much that she let out a cry in frustration before the redhead pulled out crescent rose and cut down a nearby tree to take it out on before following the heiress. Weiss, hearing the background noise that Rwby made during her walk, that caused her to roll her eyes. Such a child, she thought to herself before continue walking. Rwby herself was having a hard time as she lower her head and continue following Weiss while remaining silent. "I really wished I found Yang or Naru first," the young girl thought, both girls missing a large black feather floating down behind them. With Naru had continued walking through the dark part of the Emerald Forest, and yet still no sight of anyone nor any Grimm encounters since the Borbatusk. But she did hear the sounds of gunfire from a far distance, so she believes the initiation test wasn't over yet, or else she would have been lost and left alone. However, during her walk the fox faunus felt that something wasn't right at the moment, like she was being watched, and when she turned around to look behind, nothing was there. Which of course, being as there are Grimm somewhere within the forest, so it is possible that could be the reason. So Naru had to keep going but remain cautious and aware of her surroundings, which she let the hood of her vest down so that her fox ears were exposed and help a little. And it did help when the blonde picked up the sounds of someone talking not too far away and followed it. By then did she notice that the dark forest was getting a little bit more sunlight and the sound getting closer as she walked, until stopping when she saw the corpse of a King Taijutsu and the couple she saw earlier this morning. If she remember correctly, the ginger hair one that's hanging upside down was Nora and the boy standing by her was Run. Both seem to be having a bit of a conversation, and Naru can guess that if she found them together, and from what Professor Ojban's words, that could mean they're partners now. Now that she thought about it though, Naru did see the number of students that were part of the initiation. Last she checked before being launched into the air, there were an odd number of group and the possible chance that not everyone is going to be partnered up, and from Ojban's last words to her it made the fox faunus to wondered if the headmaster knew about this. however she was brought out of her thoughts when Naru suddenly noticed that Nora was staring at her up very close up to her face. That made the blonde yelled out in surprise and jumped back away at the other girl's sudden appearance without the faunus notice. "Hi. I'm Nora, what's your name? Are you a student trying to get into Beacon as well? Do you like sweets? Oh, you have such cute fox ears, are they real? Can I touch them? Please. Pretty please." The girl named Nora asked Naru while reaching a hand up to touch the faunus ears without giving Naru the chance to answer. However, the boy that Nora was with interfered by grabbing the back collar of her clothing and gently pulled her away, which caused her to say "aw" in disappointment. "I apologize on Nora's behave, she tends to get excited when meeting new people. My name is Lai Ren, but you may call me Ren if you wish, and you've already met Nora Valkyrie," Ren said to Naru in introduction, which Nora's disappointed face changed quickly to a happy expression when her name was heard and she gave a friendly wave to Naru. "It's nice to meet you both. I'm Nara Namikaze," the blonde faunus said until she heard Nora suddenly gasp. "Hey, we have the same name." Well, not the same name exactly, which they're spelled different, also no last names related as well, but still close nonetheless. The ginger hair girl explained as Naru couldn't help but laugh a little. "You're right, it does almost sound the same, so are you two are partnered up?" Naru asked. Ren was about to answer, but Nora cut him off when she got close to Naru's personal space again. "Yes. We've been knowing each other since we were kids and have been best friends ever since. Oh, but we're not together in case you wondered. However, we came up with this secret plan of finding each other by making sloth sounds, and it worked." Nora explained happily, so much that she ended up wrapping her arms around Ren's neck and hugged him. Naru, seeing this, couldn't help but smile and cross her arms over her chest. "That does sound like a good plan, and you're sure that you both aren't together?" The fox faunus asked with an amused smile as she saw both Ren and Nora's face went a little red. That made them back an inch away from each other, then looked away. That amused Naru even more. "Cute. Well, now that introductions is out of the way, would you mind helping me out? I'll admit I'm a little lost since I landed. We were all supposed to be heading to the temple at the end of the forest or something?" Naru asked while rubbing the back of her neck. After recovering a little, Ren would answer her. "We were just about to head there now, but wouldn't you nay?" Ren got cut off again, this time not from Nora but from a group of Ursas that entered the area with a larger one leading the pack. Naru was about to grab Tempest, however Nora interrupted her. "Oh, I got this one, I have a super awesome idea," the ginger hair girl said as she took out a large hammer, pulled a trigger on the handle that made an explosion of pink dust enough to launch her into the air and straight towards the Ursas. Should we help?" Naru asked Ren while they watched together at Nora was laughing and swinging around her hammer to knock the grim bears back as she looked to be having fun. "Do you mean Nora or the Ursas?" was all Ren had answered to Naru's question with a question of his own. Standing together near the ledge of Beacon Cliff, Professor Ashbin and Glinda Goodwitch were looking over their device tablets to monitor each student's progress. Already they had watched other students meeting and pairing up, which lead to Ren and Nora being the last ones. Then later on Naru joining them before being attacked by a pack of Ursas, which was being dealt with by Nora. However, being as every student had paired up would also make the fox faunus girl as the last person to not have a partner. And last, Nora Valkyrie and Lai Ren. That's about everyone that has paired up, all except for Ms. Namikaze, however, Glinda said as she watched both Naru and Ren looking back and forth at Nora's battle with the group of Ursa. "She will most likely be the only student without team members this year," the blonde woman added. "Perhaps, but one does not always require to be part of a team. Sometimes it helps to aid allies from not only high or low places, but from the very shadows itself," Ashbin said to Glinda as the headmaster would watch a live footage of Rwby and Weiss. Rwby and Weiss. Sitting on the grass ground, Rwby was picking fallen leaves with her fingers while having a bored expression on her face. Since escaping from the forest fire and pack of Beowulfs, the young redhead was forced to follow the heiress lead and didn't want to start trouble any farther than needed. However, they had no luck of finding their destination since Weiss had no idea where it was nor where they were, so Rwby just sat down and watched the heiress walk back and forth while talking at the same time. "It's definitely this way, no I mean this way. Alright, it's official, we passed it," Weiss had said to Rwby when the heiress stopped and gave up of finding the way they were going. "Weiss, why can't you just admit that you have no idea where we're going?" There's nothing wrong to admitting it after all, Rwby asked, slightly annoyed as she got back up to her feet. I'm admitting nothing, because I know exactly where we're going. We're going to the forest temple. Weiss exclaimed, which caused Rwby to let out a frustrated groan at the answer. Oh, stop it, you don't know where we are either. Weiss countered. Well, at least I'm not pretending like I know everything, the young redhead told the white-haired girl. What's that supposed to mean? Weiss said as she was getting angry towards the younger teen. Rwby was getting upset with the heiress as well as she spoke back her answer. It means you're a big stupid jerk and I hate you. Rwby yelled. Ugh, just keep moving. Weiss yelled back before walking in another direction, not going to let the heiress get the last words. Rwby started fake imitating Weiss's voice to mock her. Oh, just keep moving. Hurry up. Wah. Watch where you're going. Rwby said before going back to her regular voice. Why are you so bossy? Rwby's question caused Weiss to stop and turn sharply to face her. I'm not bossy, don't say things like that. Weiss exclaimed. Stop treating me like a kid. Rwby exclaimed back. Stop acting like one. Weiss yelled out in anger. Well, stop acting like you're perfect. Rwby countered. I'm not perfect. The heiress said before taking deep breaths to calm herself down. Once she did, she continued, not yet. But I'm still leagues better than you, the white-haired girl stated, and started walking away again while Rwby had a dejected look on her face. You don't even know me or even try to. Naru did when we met, the young redhead thought to herself. When her sister Yang had first introduced Naru to her, Rwby had first squealed of how cute the faunus fox ears were. And Naru had taken to liking Rwby immediately and wanted to get to know with along while hanging out with Yang. That and Rwby really enjoyed petting Naru's fox ears. Right as soon as the redhead started following the heiress, she heard strange sounds that made her stopped. Weiss? Do you hear that? Rwby question made Weiss stop and let out a frustrated sigh. I'm not. Wait, yeah I do. What is that? It sounded like dash oh god, Weiss mumbled as she and Rwby stared up at a nevermore. Yang and Blake. Right after killing the two Ursas, and confirming that they were now officially partners, both Yang and Blake continued their way through the forest until they exited out and into the clearing that held a view of the ancient ruined temple. Yang looked to her partner. Sure, it was a little disappointing that it wasn't her girlfriend or even her sister, but Blake seemed nice to the blonde brawler. However, she would need to fix up with this non-social slints the black-haired girl was going with. So think this is it? Yang asked Blake, nodding her head towards the temple. Blake gave her a blank look and shrugged her shoulders a little before heading down, with Yang not far behind her. Once they gotten closer to the ruins, the pair noticed stone pedestals that held chess pieces on top. Almost all of them were missing, giving the hint that others had arrived before them. Chess pieces? Blake questioned, confused. It may have been the first time that she spoke since they met, but it was enough to brighten up Yang a little before she spoken next. Some of them are missing. Looks like we weren't the first ones here. There's only 4 left, the blonde said as she examined one of the chess pieces that was shaped as a horse. Well, I guess we should pick one, Blake suggested as she too examined one of the last pieces till she suddenly looked behind her. For a second the black-haired girl thought she heard something from a far distance within the forest. They exited out and that her black bow moved a little from on top her head, which Yang had missed when she grabbed the horse-shaped piece. How about a cute little pony? Yang exclaimed while waving the item she held in mid-air. Blake rolled her amber-colored eyes and had a small smile on her lips after mumbling sure before making her way to her partner. See, that wasn't too hard. Yang added. Well, it's not like this place is very difficult to find, Blake said before once again turning back to the forest again. Yang? Do you heard something? Her question caused the blonde brawler to have a puzzled look on her face. I don't hear. Yang stopped mid-sentence when suddenly a large group of Ursas burst out from the forest and running straight to them. Holy crap. A stampede of Yangri teddies. The blonde quickly blurted out with a bit of adding a pun. No time to turn and run. Both Yang and Blake got out their weapons and stood ready. If they both die, the least they could do is die fighting instead of waiting for death. When the strangest thing happened. The whole pack of Bear Grimm broke off into 2 groups and ran around both girls and the temple to regroup on the other side as they continued running, leaving both huntress and trainees stunned. Turning around, Yang quickly went to face the retreating Grimm. Hey! Where do you think y'all are going? We're standing right here. The brawler shouted out, but the Ursas were long gone by now. That was unexpected. Grim don't usually run away like that, Blake said as she sheathed back Gamble's shroud away while Yang would turn back to her partner. Yeah, what gives? Those other two we saw earlier fought to the death, yet this was like an entire pack, but they ignored us. Yang said, and right before Blake would respond they heard a "Yeehhhhhawww." Both girls turned back to the forest to see a Alpha Ursa coming out of the forest with Nora on its back along with Ren, who looked to be holding on for dear life. The two had been riding on the large Grim the whole way, chasing the pack of Ursas right after Nora had beaten up the Alpha right when she came up with the idea of riding on its back with Ren. Rather said boy agreed to or not. Walking up beside them was Naru. The fox Faunus had decided to walk the whole way while following the couple through the forest as well as watching Nora enjoying her new ride. Looking towards the ride, Naru could see that the Alpha was looking miserable and tired, that want nothing more than an end to all of this. Feeling slightly bad for it, Naru decided to end the poor Grim's suffering by walking up to the head, pulling out Tempest and quickly put it into gun form, pressed the barrel to its side and pulled the trigger as the bear Grim would drop down dead. The sudden drop caused Nora to fall off the creature's back and landed on the ground with a sad pout on her lips. "Ah, it's broken," she said, ignoring the fact that Naru was the cause of its death, then would sprang up to her feet and observed the body, then to where Naru had shot it. Nora had said while Ren had came up from behind her and was panting. "Nora, please don't ever do that again," he said while still panting to catch his breath until he did. However, Ren felt a tap on his shoulder that followed by Naru's voice. Ren," the fox Faunus said before pointing her finger out. Ren followed it to see that Nora had went on ahead to one of the pedestals that had one chess piece different from Yang's. Next they watched the ginger-haired girl pick it up and started singing "I'm Queen of the Castle" until Ren called her out and soon had returned to her partner, all the while being watched by Blake and Yang. "Did that girl just ride on a Alpha Ursa?" Blake questioned to Yang, however her partner's attention was on her girlfriend. "Foxy!" Yang shouted out as she ran towards Naru. Said girl turned when she heard that. "Yang!" Naru too started running towards the blonde brawler, right as the two were about to embrace each other. "Nora!" Both halted when Nora had popped in between them with her arms out and a bright smile on her face, even though she interrupted what would have been a heart-warming reunion between the couple. "Ga Nora! Don't keep popping out of nowhere like that!" Naru yelled out as while Nora would tilt her head in wonder of what the fox Faunus girl was yelling about. That was when Naru would soon take note of Blake's presence. "Oh hi Blake, wait, are you two now?" Naru's question was directed towards Yang while looking back and forth between the blonde and black-haired girls. "Partners?" "Yeah, sorry Foxy, Blake and I met up in the forest before arriving here," Ang said while brushing her hair with her hands, a bit nervous at Naru's reaction. Blake decided to add herself into the conversation before any misunderstandings happen. "Naru, I just want you to know that nothing will happen between Yang and myself. We're partners and I'll be sure to help her out with whatever I can. Otherwise I'll try to make sure nothing bad happens to her." The black-haired girl spoke as Naru turned to her for a moment as Naru's sapphire eyes stared into Blake's amber-colored ones till Naru nodded. "Alright, I can accept that," the fox Faunus said until the group heard a high-pitched scream that echoed through the sky as well as making birds hiding in trees fly away. "Did you hear that? Some girl is in trouble," Yang exclaimed as Naru answered her. "Nah, that's John," she said plainly. It was at this moment that Ren would rejoin the group with Nora by his side as the gingered-hair girl was off in her own day-dream at the time. "And how do you know that?" he asked Naru. It was similar to the scream he made back when he was launched in the air. "You just have to imagine it with a different tone," Naru said as she saw Blake was looking up at the sky for some reason. "Blake? What are you looking?" "Oh," Naru said when she looked up and saw Red coming towards them. "Heads you up!" Rwby cries out while she was falling down from the sky and towards the group. "Rwby!" Rwby opened her eyes at the sound of Weiss' voice shouting over the rapid wind sound. Currently both girls were holding onto the feathers of the large Nevermore they encountered, and Rwby had the idea of hitching a ride on the Grim to get a better view from high above. "I told you this was a bad idea," Weiss added. "We're fine. Stop worrying," Rwby shouted out over the wind sound so that the heiress would hear her. "I am so far beyond worrying." Weiss said, which confused Rwby for a moment in wonder. In a good way? The redhead's question caused an angry white-haired girl to respond. In a bad way. In a very bad way. Weiss shouted while still holding on to dear life on the Nevermore. Well, why don't we just jump? Rwby suggested. What? Are you insane? Weiss questioned in disbelief, only to realize that Rwby wasn't there no longer, meaning that she did jump. Oh, you insufferable little red dash. Present time. Rwby was still falling and screaming heads up all the way down towards the group. However, it was that time Jaune had arrived when he collied with the young girl from being thrown in mid from the right. Naru winced when the two soon crashed and landed on one of the forest branches. I know that's gonna have to hurt on both of. Wait, where did Jaune came from? Was the fox Faunus thought till she heard tree crushing sounds coming from the same direction the blonde boy came from while hearing Blake speak. Did your sister just fall from the sky? Her question was towards her partner while she, Yang, Run, and Nora looked to the directions where Rwby and Jaune went, opposite from where Naru was looking. Before the blonde brawler could answer the black-haired girl, however, the same crashing noise brought their attention and looked to where Naru was looking. Out from the forest was Pyrrha with a giant grim-like scorpion known as a deathstalker right on her tail, swiping its pinchers and stinger forward, which Pyrrha would keep dodging and ducking out of the way while still running. Jaune! She cried out her partner's name while still avoiding the deathstalker. Said partner was hanging upside down by a tree branch with Rwby and was on alert from hearing his name being called. Pyrrha! Jaune called out as he struggled to get himself free just as Rwby had woken up, saw how high she was up, then immediately got down, completely forgotten about the blonde boy. Wait, Rwby! Whoa! Jaune cried out when he got loose and fell on top the branch that Rwby was on. When the young redhead got down, both Yang and Naru greeted her. Rwby! Both blonde girls said at the same time as Rwby turned to them. Yang! Naru! Rwby shouted in joy at seeing her sister and best friend, right as the three girls would go in for a group hug. However, Nora sprang out from the center, causing all girls to froze still in place from being interrupted once again. Before Naru would start yelling again, however, Ren would grab the back of his partner's collar shirt and dragged her away while Nora would say aw in disappointment. After that display, Blake started speaking up her mind once more. Did she just run all the way here with a deathstalker on her tail? Her question was to everyone on the topic of Pyrrha's arrival. Yang, however, was having a bit of trouble of controlling her anger, but with the interruptions of being reunited with her sister and girlfriend, the brawler just couldn't hold it in much longer. I can't take it anymore. Could everyone just chill out for 2 seconds before something crazy happens again? Yang's outburst caused her aura to burst into flames for a moment and her eyes glowing red. She was panting hard and tried to calm herself down till someone had spun her around and pressed their lips against hers, making the blonde brawler go eye widen for a second, then would close her eyes and just enjoyed the kiss that her girlfriend was giving her till they parted away. Feeling better now? Naru asked with a smile as she saw Yang reopened her eyes, color returned back to lilac, and gave the Faunus a nod and smile back. Yang? Hearing Rwby's voice made them turn to see the young redhead was looking up at the sky along with Blake and Ren, while Nora was looking right at them, though all four had small blushes on their faces. Deciding to avoid any awkwardness, Yang and Naru look up to see Weiss was still hanging on to the Nevermore that was flying above their heads. How could you leave me? They all heard the heiress' screaming voice echoed through the sky along with the Grimm's roar. I said jump, Rwby said while looking up at her partner with everyone else. She's gonna fall, Blake said in a deadpan tone. She'll be fine, Rwby added. She's falling, Ren said when Weiss had finally let go. Now I feel really bad for jinxing Rwby, Naru said out loud, remembering the thought she had of Rwby ending up with a partner of not getting along with. They all continued to watch Weiss fall, and Naru had thought maybe it was a good time for them to choose if they should decide whether to catch the heiress or not. Fortunately, they didn't have to make that decision, as Jaune would leap into the air and catch Weiss in his arms in attempt to impress her for his heroic deed, which was short-lived when he realized that they were still in mid-air and fallen together, with Jaune landed face first on the ground, then Weiss landing on top of him with a bored look on her face. My hero, the heiress said sarcastically before getting off the blonde boy. My back, Jaune groaned in pain as he too got back onto his feet, While this was happening, the Deathstalker that was chasing Pyrrha managed to land a hit that threw her over to the rest of the gang and slammed into the dirt ground right by their feet. Great, the gang's all here. Now we can die together. Yang sarcastically said as Naru turned to her girlfriend. Well, if that's the case, Yang, how long will you marry me? The fox faunus girl questioned, which caused a big what? Reaction from the gang along with some blushes on their faces, a bigger one on Yang's. Well, that seems to gotten everyone's minds off the dying part now, even if Yang did said it sarcastic. But still, you never know when it is our last days in life, so I might as well ask now than later. Naru explained to them just as Weiss began speaking up first before anyone else. I am going to die, surrounded by idiots I have ever met on Remnant, the white-haired girl said as the heiress hadn't thought how this would be the end for her. Rwby, getting out of her stun trance from what Naru just asked her sister, decided to brighten things up just as the Deathstalker was making its way towards the group. Not if I can help it, the redhead would said before she charged forward straight at the large scorpion Grim. Yang had finally managed to take notice of her sister running and made her forget on what Naru asked her a minute ago. Rwby, wait. The brawler called out, but was too late as Rwby pulled out Crescent Rose and used it to give her a speeding boost after firing a round behind her. But when she was close enough, the Deathstalker would smack her away with its pincher and Rwby fell to the ground. Rwby! Yang screamed as she started sprinting forward to save her younger sister. It was then that Naru would notice that the Nevermore would return and flying ahead towards the blonde brawler. Yang! Stop! Naru yelled as she ran after her girlfriend as fast as she could before Yang would get herself killed. When she was close enough, the faunus would soon tackle her to the ground just as the Nevermore's giant feathers rained down upon them, missing every hit, except for one. When she saw her plan of attack failed, Rwby started running away from the Deathstalker, but one of the Nevermore's feeders managed to pin the cape of her hooded cloak to the ground, trapping her as the young redhead tried to pull it free. Both Naru and Yang got back up to view the Deathstalker closing in on Rwby. Rwby, get out of there! Yang cried out, her tone of voice sounding panic and fear at seeing the giant Grim approach. I'm trying! Rwby yelled back as she discreetly pulled on her cloak. Rwby, just unhook your cloak and run. Naru shouted her suggestion but saw the young girl shaking her head. No! I'm not leave. Rwby was about to say how important her cloak was until she noticed that the Deathstalker was upon her and raising its stinger back to finish her off. Rwby! Yang screamed and Naru was about use her semblance till both notice a white blur quickly passed them and Rwby closed her eyes waiting for the end, but it never came. You are so childish. A familiar voice spoke into Rwby's ears as she slowly opened her eyes again to notice the back form of her partner and an ice wall that trapped the Grim stinger and that her cape was now free. Weiss? The redhead asked just as Weiss would pull Headmaster out from the ground. And dim-witted, and hyperactive, and don't even get me started on your fighting style, the heiress stated as she turned to the younger girl, and I suppose I can be a bit difficult. She tried sighing, which was straining her to say, but still continued. But if we're going to do this, we're going to have to do this together, so if you quit trying to show off, I'll try to be nicer. Weiss said to Rwby as she helped the young girl back up to her feet. Weiss, I'm not trying to show off, I want you to know, I can do this, Rwby said, trying to reassure the heiress. Which the young redhead looked to the ice wall and that Deathstalker struggling to get its stinger free. You're fine, the white-haired girl said before walking around Rwby and back to the group just as Yang ran and hugged her sister tightly, being relieved that the young girl was safe. When the heiress was about to pass Naru, she stopped and didn't turn to the fox faunus girl as she spoke. You and I may not get along, but like Rwby, I'm willing to work together with you as well, the heiress said before joining in with the others. Okay, I suppose I can take that as a good thing, I think, Naru thought to herself. The sounds of ice cracking brought her attention to see that the Deathstalker was starting to get loose and the sounds of the Nevermore returning above their heads. Guys! That thing's circling back and the other one is about to get loose, John said in a slight panic tone in his voice. Weiss could only roll her eyes at the blonde boy's reaction before voicing out to calm him down a bit. Look, there's no sense in dilly-dallying, our objective is right in front of us, the heiress said while pointing at the stone pillars with the remaining chess pieces on top. This time it was Rwby's turn to speak up to the group. She's right, our mission is to grab an artifact and make it back to the cliffs, there's no point in fighting these things, the young redhead told them, clearly getting her head in the game, and her partner Weiss gave a nod in approval of how the young girl acted. Run and live, yeah, that is an idea I can get behind. John said in agreement as he and Rwby would go over to retrieve the artifacts, which Rwby pick out the same that match Yang's and John the same with Nora's. The ice that was still holding onto the Deathstalker's stinger was about to give out, and Ren had told everyone that it was time for them to leave. Alright, let's go everyone, Rwby said as she ran up ahead to take the lead with everyone else following behind her, except for Yang, as she stood back and had a proud look on her face as she stared at her younger sister. Blake had noticed her partner not moving and quickly made her was over to the blonde brawler. Yang? What is it? The black-haired girl asked her. Yang was still silent for a moment in her own thoughts till she answered. Oh, nothing, was her reply, until Yang suddenly remembered something odd as she did a head count of who followed Rwby and notice, besides herself and Blake, that one person was missing. Turning back to the ruin, Yang had an eyebrow raised in wonder. Foxy, what are you doing? She called out, and Blake followed her partner's gaze to see that Naru was looking around the pillars. Hang out a sec, I just need a moment. The fox Faunus called out as she was still looking. After remembering Ojben's words before the test started, he said something about a relic hidden from the others. What was he talking? Aha, found it. Naru thought as she looked over the pillar that Rwby grabbed her relic, and at the bottom there was a small opening where she could see a small metal box. Pulling it out from its hiding place, Naru would opening it up as a round-shaped golden medallion was inside with beacon symbol on it. Well, that seems to be easy. Okay, I'm coming now, guys. She called out to Yang and Blake. However, she was confused when Naru saw both girls had shocked looked on their faces while looking past her. Naru, behind you! Yang cried out in a worried tone. That's when Naru noticed a shadow over her and quickly moved out of the way just as something impacted on the spot she was standing. When the small dust had cleared, Naru could see that it was another large grim like the size of a ursa. Only this one was resembled of a fox with its fur black as night, and unlike the other grim had no bone platings on its body but did had the red markings visible on the fur, though would be barely noticed at a distance, and shadow areas, expose long canine fangs and sharp claws, and 9 long tails as the fox-like grim's red eyes were staring directly towards Naru. Oh my god, a Rwby? That's who. Naru would say before she quickly rolled out of the way when the Rwby would lung at her once more and the fox Faunus girl would start taking off running to the forest area. I'll meet you all later. Go! She called out to Yang and Blake while the grim-like fox would give chase after her. Naru! Yang cried out as she was about to go help her girlfriend until she felt a hand grabbing her shoulder, turning around with red-colored eyes, and now Yang saw that it was her partner that stopped her. Yang, she'll be fine, but we need to get back to the others right now, Blake said as she looked up to see the Deathstalker had finally gotten free and was making its way towards the girls. God damn it! You better stay alive, Naru, so I can kick your ass later, were Yang's thoughts before she started running with Blake away from the large scorpion. With Naru kept running through the forest as well as ducking and jumping over tree stump roots that were above ground. She didn't need to look behind her to know that the Rwby was still there, being as she was nearly hit when it swiped at her with its sharp claws after the grim made an attempt to lung at her when it got too close. Rwbys were one of the most dangerous grim that it would be at least challenging to a skilled huntsman and are rarely seen. They be deadly in stealth because of not having bone plating on their bodies. They could blend into the deep darkest shadow areas that hardly no one would be able to see them if the person isn't aware and caution. However, this would also leave the Rwby without any sort of protection, which is why they only go after their prey that was alone away from others. It was this thought that Naru figure at it followed her at the beginning and waited for the right moment to strike at her. I just got to regroup with the others and head back to Beacon. I'll bet Yang will kill me for making her worried sick, were the fox Fauna's thoughts until she halted her movement when she saw the Rwby had managed to get around and stood in her way. Before it would strike, Naru had brought Tempest out and used both Tunfas to block one of its claws as the impact made Naru slide back while still standing. Naru would then saw that the Rwby was nowhere in sight after the strike, but did notice that the area had little light that was blocked by the trees above her head, and can feel the fox Grim was still staring at her from a hidden place she couldn't tell where. Alright, you want to play hide and seek? Fine, Naru called out as she stood there, Tempest still out in hand, and waited. Silence was all she heard, no sounds of any wildlife could be made as Naru slowly shifted her eyes around the dark forest. It was then that her fox ears shift up from a sudden sound from behind that Naru turned, then quickly duck in time when the Womam went sailing through above her head when it attempted to lunge at her. Striking it with her left tonfa, Naru barely managed to hit the beast before one of its 9 tails deflected the blow before it quickly retreated back into the dark forest. Another thing that Naru forgotten, that Womams could use all 9 of their tails. They could extend the length to about a 20-yard distance and strong enough to lift up a single Goliath. An elephant-type Grim in mid-air, once wrapped up by all 9 tails. Although they may be dangerous creatures, that doesn't mean they are invincible. Neutralize 2 or 3 of the tails and the Womam would retreat away to save its own strength and try again later, or if one doesn't then at least would be able to take down its defenses then kill it. Naru would quickly shift to the left, then ducked and roll away when 3 of the black tails slammed to the spots of where she was, then quickly retreated back into the darkness within the forest. The fox faunus girl thought of a way to be able to find the Grim till a sudden realization hit her enough to smack her own forehead. "Oh, I'm such a bloody idiot," Naru said to herself out loud before she stared at the dark areas of the forest. The one thing good about being in faunus is having night vision, as Naru's vision changed as she could see the dark area as clear as day. And there was what she was looking for, as the Womam was laying low to the ground while staring straight at her. "Aha, gotcha," Naru thought as she charged off running straight towards the fox Grim. The Womam stood its ground when it would send 5 of its 9 tails to lash out at the faunus girl. Naru had to avoid the tails that tried to hit her before managing to get in close enough to strike with both tonfas at the Grim, which moved away from her attacks till it lunged forward, mouth wide open in attempt to bite Naru's head off with its sharp teeth until the fox faunus backflip kick it away from her. Landing on her feet, Naru would quickly change Tempest to gun, then loaded it with one of her special type dust bullets, Cryo, and fired a few rounds when she saw one of the tails coming at her, and upon impact the tail would start freezing over and froze before Naru would shattered it with a hard roundhouse kick. The Womam would made a painful howl from one of its tails destroyed, but would shake off the pain as the Grim would use the remaining 8 tails to extend and attack Naru all at once, which the fox faunus had to change Tempest form once again to be able to block them with her 2 tonfas. However, one tail managed to wrap around her leg that caught her by surprise when she was lifted up and tossed hard towards the forest, causing Naru to brace herself in mid-air as she crashed through a few trees, hard and out of the forest and into a clearing of a cliff side. Slowly getting up to her feet, while feeling a slight pain going through her body, Naru's fox ears perk up at the sounds of combat in a distance not too far away. Turning her head, she saw her friends had slipped up into 2 groups that were fighting the other 2 greater Grims, Rwby in company of her sister Yang along with Weiss and Blake fighting the Nevermore, John along with Pyrrha, Nora, and Ren taking on the Deathstalker, as each team were on opposite sides from a large valley with old stone ruins. It was at this distance that Naru watched as how each team managed to kill the Grim, the Deathstalker falling to its death and the Nevermore having its head chopped off, that she almost forgotten about the Grim attacking her and proved too late when Naru turned around just as the Womam tackled and pinned her down on the ground using all of its strength to keep her still, while Naru still struggled a way to get free, while at the same time moved her head away from when the Womam tried to bite her head off again. Having no other choice, Naru would use her semblance, Kitsune, as it caused a slight shock blast from the bursting aura energy for being used that caught the Womam off guard and sent it flying away from the faunus girl. Getting back to her feet, Naru ready Tempest back up to a defense stance just as the Womam would get back up and rushed at her to attack once more, with Yang and the others. "Well, that was a thing," Yang said as she stood beside with both Blake and Weiss as the trio of girls were looking up at Rwby on top of the cliff. The blonde brawler couldn't help but smile at the pride she felt for her younger sister after beheading the Nevermore. But it was short-lived when the sounds of fighting brought their attention up to Naru's spot and Yang's smiling face turned to Rory and concerned expression. "Is that Naru over?" her partner Blake asked out. Then Weiss would speak out her own question. "Is that a Womam she's fighting?" Once the heiress question has been spoken, Rwby had soon quickly rejoined the group. "Did you guys see what I just did?" the young redhead asked in excitement over what she did, obviously unaware of the situation that was going on until Yang would grab her sister's head and turn her over to where they were looking. "Oh, look, there's Naru. Wait, is that a Womam she's fighting?" Rwby asked, which caused a tick mark to appear on Weiss' forehead. I just asked that question. The heiress yelled in frustration, but she was ignored when Yang started speaking up. Slingshot me, the blonde brawler said, which caused confusion to the girls for a second till they realized what she meant. Yang, are you? Blake had started but stopped when she saw her partner turn to her, red eyes and a determined on her face while activating Ember Celica in her hands. Just do it. Yang said, so all four girls quickly went into position of making a makeshift slingshot a minute ago. Only this time with Yang and Rwby switching places from before, with the young redhead trying to hold on due to the lack of body strength that her sister had as she and Blake held on while Weiss held the black glyph she made in the direction that was aiming Yang at towards where Naru was. You know that this is okay, shutting up now, sorry. Weiss had started speaking till she shutting up when Yang turned her head to glare at her. After making sure that she used the glyph that released Yang, and the blonde brawler shot forward using her gauntlets to help boost up the speed in the direction of her target. Naru herself had to switch from defense to offense from time to time against the Rwby, but during that time with Kitsune active she can feel her muscles started to hurt from the amount of time from each passing few minutes. Just as the fox-like Grim would attack once again, Yang had suddenly appeared when she punched the side of the Grim's skull that sent it flying away from the fox faunus girl. Landing on her own 2 feet, the blonde brawler would turn to her girlfriend and gave a playful wink to her, hey good looking. Mind if I? Before she could make an attempted bad pun, however, Naru tackled her down just as the Rwby tried to lung at Yang from behind, and the fox-like Grim unfortunately land and slide off the cliff. In a last attempt used 1 or 2 of its tails to grab hold Naru's legs and dragged her over the cliff, with Yang who was trying to pull Naru away but ended up being dragged along till her upper body was over the ledge and held onto Naru's arms tightly while the Rwby was hanging onto the faunus girl as well. Whoa. Talk about a cliffhanger. Yang added. Not with the puns now, Yang. Naru yelled as she tried kicking her legs out to get the tails to let go of her, but they were on a vice grip and wouldn't let go. Soon Naru felt more tails wrapped around her as the Rwby attempted to make sure it at least bring her with when it would fallen to death. That was until one of the tails was cut off from 1 or 2 bullets fired by Rwby as she used Crescent Rose Sniper mod. Yang felt like gravity had suddenly dropped 10 tons down to hold her still as she looked down to see she was laying under one of Weiss' glyphs. Naru would hear gunshot-like sounds as she turned her head to see Blake making her way over by swinging herself over using Gamble Shroud. When she reached over to her partner, Blake would extend her own hand to help Naru up while Rwby managed to shoot off a few more tails before the Rwby had to let go due to the pain it felt before falling to its death. Now with the answer gone, Naru was safely pulled up by Yang and Blake, along with her semblance disabled, as all 3 girls would lay on their backs panting for a bit before Yang would sat up. Now, that was a thing, she said before Naru would make a annoyed groan along with Blake joining her.